Chapter 1. The Winds of Deadwind. Pass the wind in Deadwind, pass never stops. It sighs, tired, heavy, smelling faintly of old magic. Follow the lonely road and you'll find trees that seem to remember being alive and shadows that walk a little behind you. At the valley's heart crouches Karazhan, the tower of Medivh, the last guardian's spire, and perhaps Azeroth's most elegant mistake. Its crooked walls gleam under a moon that doesn't quite trust it. The air hums with tangled ley lines below, pulsing like a heartbeat or a laugh. Most travelers turn back, but we'll stay, light a candle, and listen to the story of the tower that remembers everything. Chapter 2. The Tower That Watches Itself. To understand Karazhan, you have to understand its foundation. Not the stone, but the purpose. It wasn't always haunted. Once upon a less chaotic time, it was meant to be a home, a sanctuary for the guardian of Tirisfal, the greatest mage of his age, protector of Azeroth, and occasional source of cataclysmic bad luck, Medivh. But the land it was built on, well, even before the tower existed, Deadwind Pass was wrong. There are old records, dusty scrolls tucked away in Dalaran's libraries, that describe flickering lights in the valley centuries before the tower rose. Ghostly apparitions, glimpses of futures that never were. Farmers spoke of voices whispering their names at night, and of dreams so vivid that waking felt like exile. So naturally, someone decided to build a mage tower there, because that's what powerful mages do when faced with danger. They build closer to it. And so the tower grew, stone by enchanted stone, rising along the fault lines of magic itself. Its builders were said to be the finest artisans of Stormwind and Dalaran, though none lived long enough to see its completion. The stories disagree on why. Some say they were drained by the magic in the ground. Others say the tower began to build itself near the end, reshaping rooms when no one was looking. The final stone was set, and the tower breathed for the first time, a ripple of energy that ran down into the earth and up into the stars, like a sigh of satisfaction, or perhaps a shiver of warning. Karazhan was alive. And when Medivh came to live there, it began to dream. Chapter 3. The Boy Who Would Be Guardian. Medivh's story begins, as all truly complicated stories do, with good intentions and disastrous execution. He was born under an omen, not the nice kind, like a rainbow or a comet shaped like a bunny, but the sort that makes experienced mages quietly leave the room to check the wards. His mother, Egwin, was the guardian of Tirisfal, the living weapon forged to defend Azeroth against the Burning Legion. She was brilliant, powerful, stubborn, and entirely too confident in her ability to control destiny. And destiny, as we know, does not like being told what to do. Egwin had defeated Sargeras, the Dark Titan, the big, fiery boss of all demonic bosses, or so she thought. In truth, she only defeated his avatar, a sort of fiery projection. Sargeras, being the sore loser that he was, didn't take defeat gracefully. He did what any self-respecting dark god would do. He cheated. When Egwin faced him, the dark spirit of Sargeras slipped into her like a shadow slipping under a door, not possessing her fully, but embedding himself in her essence. Waiting, whispering, patient. Years later, when she bore a child, Medivh, that dark fragment of Sargeras, passed into him like an inheritance nobody wanted, but everyone would regret not reading the fine print for. So, from birth, Medivh was both the greatest hope and the gravest threat the world had ever known. Half the might of Tirisfal, half the whisper of a fallen titan wrapped in a blanket and left to coo at the ceiling. He grew up in Stormwind Keep, surrounded by tutors, scrolls, and the kind of childhood that only the magically overqualified can enjoy. There are stories, half rumor, half truth, that as a child, Medivh could already hear voices in his dreams. Sometimes they spoke in riddles. Sometimes they told him the secrets of stars that hadn't been born yet. Occasionally, they just laughed. By all accounts, he was a bright boy, charming, curious, occasionally terrifying. He could make things float, read minds by accident, and once turned an entire flock of pigeons into candles during a tantrum. His mother was proud. His tutors were less so, especially the one who tried to confiscate his wand and ended up turned into a very articulate toad. But beneath that brilliance, the shadow of Sargeras stirred. When Medivh came of age, the moment when the power of the Guardian awakens fully within its host, the floodgates opened. All the might of Tirisfal, all the centuries of stored magic, and the dark ember of Sargeras' will, all at once. It was too much, even for him. He fell into a deep, unending sleep, a magical coma that lasted years. His mother, terrified, sealed him away in Stormwind, watching over him with the guilt of a woman who'd accidentally doomed her son while trying to save the world. When he finally woke, the world had changed. Kingdoms risen and fallen, friends grown older, and Medivh himself, now a man. But something was wrong. His eyes, people said, looked like they had seen through time, and didn't particularly enjoy what they'd seen. He smiled often, but his laughter never reached his eyes. Soon after, he left Stormwind. He needed solitude, he said. A place to think. A place where the noise of the world couldn't follow him. And so, guided by fate, madness, and perhaps the faint whisper of the dark thing within, he found his way to the quiet valley of Deadwind Pass. He found Karazhan. The tower awakens. The moment Medivh set foot in Karazhan, the tower recognized him. It's hard to say exactly what that means. A tower doesn't have a mouth to speak or eyes to see, but magic has a way of knowing. The ley lines beneath it pulsed brighter, the air grew warmer, and faint lights began to glow in windows that hadn't seen a candle in centuries. Books opened themselves, doors unlocked. The tower, like a cat sensing its old master, stirred. Medivh made it his home. He filled it with tomes and trinkets, with strange beasts and stranger guests. He wandered the halls alone, muttering spells to no one, occasionally laughing at jokes only he could hear. And at night, when the moon rose over Deadwind Pass, the tower would hum with quiet, dreamlike energy, a sound somewhere between a heartbeat and the turning of pages. Visitors to Karazhan described it as bewitching. Time behaved oddly inside. Some claimed they lost hours just walking the main hall. Others swore they met themselves coming down the stairs. Meals appeared on tables no one had set. A fireplace would light when a story began, and dim when it ended. It was, in short, the perfect home for a man who was slowly losing the distinction between thought and reality. The visitors. Despite his isolation, Medivh was not without company. He had servants, of course, attendants, cooks, and groundskeepers who quickly learned that the tower's floors sometimes moved and that dusting a bookshelf could lead to an unplanned trip into another dimension. Still, they stayed. The pay was excellent, and the health plan was probably irrelevant because most of them were technically immortal by the end of it. He also had guests, scholars, kings, and ambitious apprentices who came seeking wisdom. Among them were two names that would one day become legends in their own right. Khadgar, the young mage from Dalaran sent to study under him, and Garona, the half-orc assassin whose destiny was tied to Medivh's in ways none of them could yet see. Khadgar, bright-eyed and eager, came to learn the ways of magic. Garona came, reluctantly, as a messenger of darker forces. And in Karazhan, under the flickering chandeliers and ever-shifting staircases, the three would become something like friends, at least for a time. Khadgar would later write in his journals, though very few survived, that the tower itself seemed to listen to Medivh. When he spoke, the candles flared. When he grew angry, the shadows deepened. Sometimes, when he slept, the tower whispered back. It was as though Karazhan was a mirror, reflecting its master's soul. And that, dear listener, is a dangerous thing indeed. The first storm. As Medivh's power grew, so too did the influence of Sargeras within him. The whispers in his dreams became louder. The shadows in the corners began to take shape, and somewhere deep beneath the tower, through the tangled roots of magic, the Burning Legion listened. At first, the corruption was subtle. Medivh's temper grew short, his humor sharp. He began speaking of destiny, of great purposes, of doors that should be opened. He would spend days alone in the observatory, staring into visions of other worlds, muttering names no mortal tongue should know. Khadgar noticed, of course. So did Garona. But they were young, and Medivh was a man of unimaginable power and great charm. He could shift from fury to warmth in an instant, and when he smiled, even the tower seemed to sigh in relief. But behind that smile, something was stirring, something ancient, something that had waited 1,000 years to wake again. The stage was set, the tower watched, the curtain trembled, and soon the world itself would change forever. Chapter 4. The opening of the portal. The trouble with power, real, world-shaping, capital P power, is that it rarely comes with a warning label. Medivh, guardian of Tirisfal, had enough power to level mountains, call lightning from the sky, and turn time itself into a polite suggestion. But inside him burned a second fire, older, crueler, and infinitely patient. The fragment of Sargeras, dark titan of the Burning Legion, had been waiting since Medivh's first breath for its chance to act, and the moment was finally ripening. The Tower of Karazhan had grown restless. Its hallways lengthened when no one looked. Its mirrors reflected scenes that hadn't yet happened. Books whispered to each other after midnight in languages that hadn't existed for millennia. Something in the fabric of the place was loosening. At first, Khadgar assumed it was simply what living in Karazhan did to the mind. After all, the tower sat atop one of the most volatile intersections of ley lines on Azeroth. Reality itself thinned there, like parchment stretched too far over a frame. Dreams bled into waking. Thoughts became things. But even the tower seemed uneasy now. Doors refused to open for Medivh. The air shimmered with unseen heat when he entered a room. Sometimes his voice would echo twice, once in his own tone, and again, fainter, deeper, like another voice using his mouth. Garona noticed too, though she said little. Assassins are not philosophers by trade, but she knew the scent of corruption. She had grown up among the orcs, among demons who whispered promises of glory and power. The smell of fell magic was something you didn't forget, and Karazhan reeked of it, the visions. In his tower study, Medivh spent hours, sometimes days, staring into pools of arcane reflection. He sought to understand the visions that haunted him, burning worlds, marching demons, and skies torn open like wounds. He thought he could master them. He believed he could control what he saw. But the truth was that the visions were not his to command. They were memories, Sargeras's memories. They bled into him like ink into water, staining his thoughts. He began to see the Burning Legion not as an enemy, but as inevitability, the natural fire that would burn away the weakness of all worlds. At times, he would speak of it to Khadgar, softly, almost philosophically. Perhaps destruction is only another form of creation, my apprentice. A forest must burn for new growth to begin. Why should the universe be any different? Khadgar, young but wise beyond his years, would smile nervously and change the subject. In his private notes, he wrote, "My master dreams with open eyes now. I fear that when he wakes, the world will dream with him." The opening. The day the portal opened began like any other in Karazhan, which is to say, mildly unsettling and faintly theatrical. Storms rolled over Deadwind Pass. The sky was the color of unpolished steel. The tower groaned as thunder shivered through its bones. Medivh had locked himself in the great library. No one dared disturb him, not even Moros, his ever-faithful steward, who could usually coax him to dinner with a raised eyebrow and the promise of spiced wine. Khadgar, sensing the pressure of gathering magic, felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. He knew the rhythm of spellwork, the pulse of mana in the air, and this was different. This was wrong. He found Garona on the stairwell, her hand already on her dagger. They shared a look, then together they ascended the winding halls toward the source. At the heart of the library, Medivh stood before a swirling vortex of emerald light. It filled the air like a living wound, beautiful and terrible, roaring with wind that came from nowhere. Pages tore themselves from books, fluttering like frightened birds. Candles burned blue. Khadgar shouted something, a warning, a plea, but the sound was devoured by the storm. Medivh turned. His eyes burned with gold and green, twin fires in shadowed sockets. Do you see, my students? The veil has parted. The worlds are one again. Through this gate, the orcs will come. Warriors, strong and pure, unspoiled by this world's complacency. They will bring the fire that remakes us all. And with those words, the dark portal was opened. The war begins. Far away, in the blasted red world of Draenor, Gul'dan, warlock of the Horde, felt the pull of that gate. His spells flared, his demons screamed in delight, and the first orcish warbands marched through, stepping out not into a wasteland, but into the green fields of Azeroth. The first war had begun, and in his tower, Medivh watched through 1,000 scrying mirrors as chaos bloomed. Cities burned, kings fell. The Guardian of Tirisfal, meant to protect Azeroth, had become its betrayer. But even then, the last human part of him fought back. In the dark hours of the night, he would wander the halls muttering apologies to ghosts that weren't there. Sometimes the tower itself seemed to comfort him, lights dimming softly, walls breathing like a heartbeat, as if it pitied him. The betrayal within. Khadgar knew what he had to do. The young apprentice had seen enough to understand that his master was lost, consumed by something vast and cruel. But how do you slay a man who once taught you the stars? He turned to Garona, who understood the necessity of grim choices. Together, they planned. When the confrontation came, it shook the tower to its core. Lightning cracked through stained glass. Books exploded into flame. Time faltered, seconds stretching, collapsing, repeating, as if the tower itself refused to believe what was happening. Khadgar fought not just Medivh, but the shadow of Sargeras within him. Garona struck from the flank, her blades flashing with desperate precision, and in the end it was Khadgar, aged by the battle into premature, white-haired wisdom, who struck the final blow. Medivh fell. For a heartbeat, the corruption fled his face, and he looked at Khadgar with clear eyes. "You did well, my boy," he whispered. "Remember, the tower remembers." Then his light went out. The storm ended. The tower went still. And deep beneath Karazhan, something vast shifted in its sleep, the aftermath. When the dust settled, Khadgar and Garona left the tower. They did not speak of what they had seen. Behind them, Karazhan sealed its own doors, stone grinding shut with a sound like finality. Inside, the servants who had not fled simply continued. Dinner was served each night at the long table, though no master came to eat. The stables were cleaned, the chandeliers polished. Moros, ever the butler, set an extra plate out each evening, perhaps out of habit, perhaps hope. But without Medivh, the tower had no anchor, and so its reality began to decay. Rooms looped back upon themselves. Mirrors showed other times. Ghostly music played in the ballroom for dancers who had been dead for decades. Karazhan had become what it was always meant to be, a reflection of its master's mind, brilliant, broken, and utterly haunted. Chapter 5. The tower sleeps and wakes again. When a man dies, the world sighs, and then it moves on. When a guardian dies, the world pauses. And when that guardian dies inside a tower built upon the crossed veins of the planet's magic, the pause can last an eternity. For years after Medivh's death, Karazhan stood silent. Its windows were dark, its gates sealed. Even the birds avoided the spire's shadow, wheeling wide as if guided by some instinct older than fear. The roads to Deadwind Pass grew over. The few travelers who passed through told stories of strange lights flickering in the high windows, and of music carried on the wind when the moon was full. Most dismissed such tales as the usual nonsense of drunk soldiers and superstitious peasants. But the Magi of Dalaran, who know the difference between a ghost story and a warning, marked the valley on their maps in bright red ink and labeled it simply, "Do not approach." And so, for a time, the tower slept. The servants who stayed. It's said that the heart of a home lingers in those who live within it. If that's true, then Karazhan's heart beat on in the people who refused to leave. When Medivh fell, not all of his household perished or Shishisi fled. A handful remained, some out of loyalty, some because the tower simply would not let them go. At the stables, Atumen, the huntsman, kept to his duties as if nothing had changed. He brushed the spectral mane of his horse, Midnight, every morning at dawn, though no dawn reached the valley now. His hunts became ritual, silent rides through mist that had long since forgotten the shape of prey. They say that if you stand by the gates of Karazhan on a moonless night, you can hear hooves in the fog, not the sound of galloping, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone still looking for his master's command. Inside, Moros, the majordomo, polished silver that would never be used again. He set the long table each evening with perfect symmetry, aligning each goblet, each folded napkin, to an invisible geometry only he could see. To Moros, dinner was never late. It was only waiting for the guests to remember to arrive. Some claim that when adventurers later broke into Karazhan, they found Moros still standing beside the table, bowing politely, as if centuries were merely a long pause between courses. He was never cruel, they say, just tired. A servant who could not stop serving, because to do so would be to admit his master was truly gone. The slow unraveling. Magic does not rot the way flesh does. It frays. And Karazhan, built atop that tangled knot of ley lines, began to fray beautifully. The first signs were small, flickers of time, a candle burning backward, a dropped spoon clinking before it hit the floor, a reflection that smiled a heartbeat too late. Then came the echoes. Visitors, the rare, unfortunate kind, would hear faint conversation behind closed doors, laughter, applause, a waltz's rhythm. They would open the door to find an empty room, save for the faint scent of wine and roses. One traveler claimed he spent an hour conversing with a kind old librarian, only to realize halfway through that the man had no shadow. When he fled, the books in the library rearranged themselves into the words, "Come back." No one did. The ley lines beneath the tower pulsed like a fevered heart. Magic built up and released in waves, creating storms of wild arcana that shimmered across Deadwind Pass. At night, lightning would strike the spire again and again, feeding it rather than breaking it. The tower drank the storms like wine. Over time, the magic grew hungry. It began to pull things inward. Time, space, memory, ghosts. Karazhan became a magnet for the unfinished and the unresolved. The haunting becomes itself. A century passed, or perhaps a moment. Time within the tower had lost its manners. The world outside fought wars, rebuilt kingdoms, and forgot. But within those crooked walls, the same night replayed endlessly. The grand ballroom shimmered with spectral dancers, their laughter echoing off cracked marble. The chandeliers blazed with ghostly fire. When the music swelled, for a heartbeat, the tower seemed alive again, as if trying to remember what joy had felt like. Somewhere in the guest quarters, a woman's voice prayed, "Forgive me, for I have failed to be pure." The echo of that prayer solidified into the being later known as the Maiden of Virtue, the tower's own guilt made flesh. Perhaps she was once a servant, or perhaps merely the echo of Medivh's buried conscience, forever kneeling, forever judging, forever unable to forgive. Deeper within, in rooms where the dust never settled, the machines began to move again. The curator, once the magical custodian of the tower's vast gallery, reactivated itself, a construct of stone and energy, who wandered the empty halls, repeating the same command over and over. "Exhibit integrity check. Unauthorized presence detected. Please refrain from touching the displays." No one touched them, of course, but the curator could not tell the difference between silence and disobedience. The demons move in, and as all haunted places do, Karazhan began to attract new tenants. The first were the invisible kind, whispers, shadows that slid along walls, reflections that grinned too long. Then came those that wore faces. The Burning Legion, drawn by the residue of Sargeras's power, found in Karazhan a perfect foothold, a house already wired for hellfire. They entered quietly, through cracks between worlds, through forgotten portals left open by Medivh's dying breath. Among them came Terestian Ilhuf, a warlock who saw the tower not as a ruin, but as opportunity. He nested deep below the foundations, where the stones still remembered their making. There, he drew his circles of flame and bargain, binding imps and lesser demons to his service. He claimed he merely wished to study the remnants of the Guardian's magic, but those who later stumbled into his domain found him surrounded by writhing, fell energy, whispering sweetly to a bound demon he called Kilrek, as though coaxing a pet. Even the tower seemed to tolerate him, perhaps amused that someone was finally redecorating. And then, one day, the air changed again. The return of the Master. Medivh's death had not been the end. The Guardian's soul, like his tower, was too tangled with magic to die neatly. There were moments, small, flickering instants, when the tower itself seemed to speak in his voice. A whisper from a painting, a sigh in the library. Once, the great mirror in the observatory cracked, and the reflection on the other side was smiling. Centuries later, when rumors reached the ears of demons that a new power had taken root within the spire, they came again, this time led by Prince Malchezaar, a dreadlord of noble bearing and deeply questionable taste in decor. Malchezaar claimed the highest chamber, a place between worlds where the stars bled red. He brought with him an entourage of lesser demons, his voice echoing through every level. All realities, all dimensions are open to me. He meant it quite literally. In Malchezaar's penthouse, constellations shifted according to his mood, and gravity occasionally called in sick. The tower bent around his will, or perhaps simply enjoyed the drama of it all. From that moment onward, Karazhan was not merely haunted, it was occupied, not by the living, not by the dead, but by everything in between. The valley below. Outside, the land reflected its master's decay. Deadwind Pass grew darker each year. The grass turned silver gray. The wind carried whispers that were not wind. Adventurers spoke of phantom figures walking the road at night. A man with a lantern, a woman in white, a boy chasing after a bird that never landed. The people of Stormwind stopped sending patrols. The mages of Dalaran stopped asking questions. Karazhan became a legend, the forbidden spire, the place where time got lost and souls went missing. And yet, those who listened closely said that sometimes, just before dawn, a faint light would glow in the tower's highest window. Not hellfire, not moonlight, something softer. As though, for a moment, the ghost of the Guardian had remembered the world he once loved. Then the light would fade, and the tower would sigh, and the wind would go on whispering. Chapter 6. The Servants Who Never Stopped Serving. There is a particular silence that belongs to grand houses left without their masters. It is not the silence of emptiness, but of waiting. The carpets hold their breath. The portraits avert their eyes. The air remembers footsteps and cannot understand why they do not come. Karazhan wore that silence like a cloak. For all its spectral orchestras and thunder that came from nowhere and everywhere, the tower's deepest note was expectancy, the long-held chord of a household that refused to accept the finality of endings. The servants of Karazhan did not flee, as servants in sensible stories often do. They stayed. And then, over years that blurred like ink in rain, they became the house. Its muscle memory, its daily ritual is a denial. At the heart of this slow-motion refusal stood a man who had spent his entire life making sure things happened on time and in the right order. Even as time melted and order evaporated like steam, he kept going with a stubborn politeness that could only be called heroic. His name was Morose, the table that was always set. Every evening, as shadows lengthened into that peculiar Karazhan dusk where lamps seemed to light themselves out of pity for the darkness, Morose would appear in the dining hall. He came soundlessly. The hall smelled faintly of beeswax and old wine, with a top note of ozone, the signature scent of rooms regularly grazed by stray spells. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rainstorms. Along the polished table ran a runner of deep burgundy, embroidered with a pattern that almost moved if one stared too long. Morose wore a severe suit that had been fashionably outdated since before Stormwind's first restoration. His gloves were immaculate, though he never changed them. His hair had the precise austerity of a man who makes peace with mirrors by refusing to give them more than a second. His eyes were the shape of duty. He set places. 12, then 14, then 7, then back to 12, whatever number the tower's mood required. There was a logic to his arrangement, a choreography memorized by bone and habit, plate, charger, cutlery, aligned as if along ley lines of etiquette, goblets that could trap candlelight and make it blush. For certain chairs, he would hover a fraction longer, adding a subtle flourish, a folded napkin shaped into a lily, a knife turned ever so slightly toward some favored hand that would not lift it. He did not speak during this work, but sometimes the hall spoke to him. From the far end, a chill breeze would carry a sound like distant conversation. If Morose paused, the voices would cut off, the way gossip does when the person being gossiped about enters the room. He would continue. The chandelier crystals would chime, almost approvingly, as if nodding to a rhythm only the fixtures could hear. On rare nights, a decanter would pour itself. The red arc would hang in the air a heartbeat too long before settling into the glass. Morose would incline his head to nothing, as if acknowledging discretion in a partner. And somewhere, in the smaller dining chamber behind the hall, a room for breakfasts that never came, an old chair would creak as if relieved to be remembered. The table was always ready before night fully arrived. No guests came. Somewhere after midnight, the plates cooled, the cutlery regained its impartial gleam, and the candles drowned one by one, leaving the last to gutter as dawn limped into the valley. Morose returned the silver to its velvet coffins. He glided from the room, and the doors, pleased to be doors, shut with a sigh. The clockwork of a man. In a tower that sprouted new hallways the way other houses collected dust, Morose navigated without looking. Which is to say, he always looked, but at nothing the rest of us would call useful. He seemed to read the wallpaper. He would tilt his head the way hounds do when a sound is too high to belong to the world, and then he would turn left where a straight corridor had been 3 hours ago. He did not check his steps. The floorboards checked themselves. People have called him a ghost. The word fits only in the way a borrowed glove fits a hand, functional, approximate, and slightly unbecoming to both glove and hand. Morose was not a ghost in the manner of a broken thing replaying its last motion. He was an intention that had learned to walk without a body. There are stories, told by adventurers who survived their own lack of caution, of Morose appearing beside them with a pale candlestick and a colder smile. "May I take your cloak?" he would ask to men not wearing cloaks, to women armored in mithril that does not fold. He would address them by titles they had not earned and names their grandparents had only considered. He would inquire about the weather in cities that had not existed for 200 years. He never forgot to offer more wine. If they declined, with the meticulous dread that politeness reserves for the uncanny, Morose would incline his head and vanish between one breath and the next. Behind him, the candles would flinch and the dust would settle into a finer pattern, like ash arranged into a sigil no one could read without learning to sleep with their eyes open. The remarkable thing is not that Morose lingered beyond life. The remarkable thing is that he did so without bitterness. He did not rage, he did not plead. He served because service was the only thing that felt true. In a tower made of unstable truths, to cling to one truth, even one as humble as the proper angle of a dessert spoon, was a defiance more profound than any swordsmanship. The huntsman who kept riding. If Morose was the tower's pulse, Atumen was its stride. There is an elegance to stable yards at dawn, the heavy, sweet smell of hay and horse, leather that remembers the curve of hands, the chorus of snorts and hoof scrapes that sound like a polite argument about breakfast. Karazhan's stables retained that elegance, with an added shimmer, as if everything had been wiped with moonlight instead of oil. Atumen slept, if he slept, standing. He had the profile of a statue that learned one day to turn its head. His hair was pulled back with the severity of a man who makes time march by ordering it to, and his beard looked like a compromise reached at sword point. His coat, long and black, had a habit of moving a half-second slower than he did, as if reluctant to be left out of decisions. His horse, Midnight, did not simply live. She continued. The way a river continues, unbothered by the rocks that insist on calling themselves obstacles. Her coat turned the light into a dark mirror, and her eyes carried the patience of old mountains. If hoofbeats can be called articulate, hers spoke several languages and were tired of being misquoted. The huntsman rode the perimeter of the grounds as if tracing a sigil whose lines only he could see. The route shifted. There was no perimeter, objectively speaking. The grounds sometimes decided there was a rose garden, where yesterday there had been a particularly judgmental elm. But Atumen always found the edges. He rode the border of the place where Karazhan agreed to be Karazhan, and the valley allowed itself to be a valley. He hunted, too. What exactly is up for dispute? There are few deer in a land that forgets to grow grass properly. Wolves know better than to invent themselves near such boundaries. Nevertheless, Atumen would return with trophies invisible to any eye that is not trained to see the shape of intention. A ribbon of shadow torn from a hedge, the echo of an oath a knight had sworn on this soil 2 empires ago. Once, a wreath of hoof smoke that smelled faintly of burnt rosemary and battlefields. He hung these carefully in the tack room as if they might wilt. He oiled saddles that never cracked. He combed Midnight's mane while she pretended to tolerate the attention. And when storms rolled in from nowhere and everywhere, their thunder a family argument between dimensions, Atumen would stand at the stable door and judge the weather for its lack of discipline. To encounter him as an intruder was a tutorial in humility. He did not shout. He did not posture. The crop in his hand made a sound vaguely like enough when it flicked the air. Midnight's breath fogged around faces not equipped to be that close to ancient decisions. If Atumen charged, it was not with the exuberance of the hunt, but with the certainty of a signature on a document you do not remember signing. To be unseated by him felt less like defeat and more like being correctly filed. There are nights when riders on distant roads, well outside Deadwind Pass, report the sensation that a horse is pacing them just beyond the shoulder, keeping their rhythm, correcting their posture by example alone. If they look, there is nothing. If they do not look, they arrive on time for the first time in years. Atumen has not left Karazhan in centuries. He does not need to. Some duties broaden with distance without ever moving a step. The quarters where work never ended. Every great house has rooms where labor rests between one task and the next. A pantry that dreams of flour, a scullery that believes in hot water the way zealots believe in revelation. A servant's corridor with low ceilings that enforce humility onto the heads of tall men with soft hands. Karazhan's servants' quarters were an ecosystem, a working city-state in miniature, with its own economy, time, its own currency, breath, and its own weather, steam. At first glance, they behaved like ordinary rooms. A second glance refused to be ordinary. The staircases changed the number of steps according to the urgency of the feet upon them. The dumbwaiter occasionally returned with notes written in handwriting that no one had, yet everyone recognized. Salt is not a personality. Do not anthropomorphize the cauldron. It does not like you. Dusting the library is how we lost Marta III. The kitchen contained a hearth where flames could be asked politely to lean to the left. Pans seasoned themselves. Knives hummed when properly sharpened and sulked when neglected. On one shelf rested a row of identical jars labeled nothing. Opening them released a small sigh and a faint smell of linen on a sunny line. No one admitted to using them. Everyone did. Deeper in, the rooms insisted on getting stranger. Not malicious. Karazhan's malice always wore better clothes, but selective. In a linen closet that had long ago conceded it was a chapel, prayer candles glowed inside folded sheets. In a wine cellar larger on Wednesdays than on Mondays, bottles rearranged themselves into constellations that suggested pairings with hypothetical meals. The pantry's floor plan obeyed the laws of hospitality rather than geometry. It was always exactly as far as it needed to be and no further. The servants' quarters also hosted, on no official schedule, guests who were not on any list. There was Hyakis the Lurker, a spider that had once been a spider and had since been promoted to title. She lived inside angles, not corners, angles. She could be found in the season between moments and had a taste for footsteps. Hyakis moved with patience, the way rain decides it is not done with a roof. She did not attack in the manner of predators. She annexed. People stepped and found their step belonging to her web. The geometry of motion turned conspirator against its owner. If one addressed her with the courtesy owed to old things that have chosen not to devour you yet, Hyakis would lift her body a fraction and agree, by silence, to let you keep your next 3 steps. Her webs, cited in good light, were mathematical arguments with excellent penmanship. Then there was Shadikith the glider, who colonized drafts. He resembled a bat if bats had learned calligraphy and applied it to flight. Shadikith wrote on air. The letters were swoops and glissandos, and the air read him back, lifting him on its grammar. He patrolled unlit ducts and chimneys, keeping the house ventilated of certain categories of thought. Intruders who arrived with bravado found their courage exiting by flew, pursued by a shape that never quite resolved into fear. Because fear is honest, and Shadikith was an editorial. Rokad the Ravager did not live in rooms. He lived in thresholds. Doors were his temples. He had the look of a wolf that had given up on forests and decided to practice theology. His presence could be detected as pressure on hinges, a subtle insistence that to pass was a moral choice. Rokad disliked indecision and punished it by making corridors longer for the undecided. Those who chose swiftly, whether rightly or wrongly, found him stepping aside with the graciousness of a maitre d' who recognizes resolve as a reservation. These 3, Hyakis, Shadikith, Rokad, were not staff in any conventional sense, but the quarters tolerated them as one tolerates forces of nature when they choose to do their weathering indoors. The kettle learned to whistle differently when Shadikith roosted near the chimney. Brooms discovered professional pride after Rokad stood in a doorway and stared at them. Hyakis kept the moths from the drapes and was therefore more beloved than anyone would admit. In this warren of work and waiting, legends of Marta multiplied. The ledger listed 3 Martas across a century. The quarters counted at least 7. Marta the First found the laundry chute that led to the year before last and refused to send towels forward if she did not like the future's manners. Marta the Fourth bartered, with the pantry for extra shelves and paid by teaching the cupboards to purr when properly closed. Marta the Seventh allegedly married a teapot. The teapot retained counsel and declined to comment. Between these rumors walked a thin boy named John, who had a talent for polishing silver so that reflections told the truth whether you wanted them to or not. Jan listened the way wells listen, taking everything in, giving water back. It was Jan who once brought Moros a spoon that showed a face that was not Moros, but could have been if duty had chosen differently. Moros looked, nodded, and told Jan to fetch more candles. If there is a soul to the servants' quarters, it is this, an uncelebrated genius for continuity. They made the impossible ordinary by repeating it until it conformed. In a place where the extraordinary strutted about in floor-length capes, the quarters put on aprons and kept the world from falling off the tray. The polite tyranny of cleanliness. There are battles that do not look like battles, because everyone agrees to lose a little each day. Dust, for instance, is a patient empire. In Karazhan, dust learned ambition. It would settle in patterns, attempting heraldry. It aspired to maps. The quarters took this personally. Mops were assigned territories and defended them like tiny, damp nations. Buckets adopted personalities. One was stoic, one gossiped by sloshing at inopportune times. One sulked under the sink whenever it rained indoors. A frequent occurrence in the corridor under the observatory. Soap could be coaxed into foaming shapes that chased after scuffs like dogs herding very slow sheep. Morose inspected with a severity that was never unkind. He ran a gloved finger along a rail and raised an eyebrow at the residue, not because the rail failed him, but because the universe had dared yet again to remind him it contained entropy. He did not scold. He assigned. Assignments were never quite tasks so much as prophecies with deadlines. There is a note in an old ledger. On this day, the chandelier in the Red Gallery apologized for existing at the wrong height. No injuries. The apology was accepted. The chandelier was raised by agreement with the ceiling, which relented after being promised fresh paint that smelled of citrus and spellword. Cleanliness in Karazhan was not the absence of dirt. It was the assertion of intention against all the small rebellions of matter. In that sense, it was kin to magic, which is likewise a polite tyranny over the tendency of things to be merely themselves. The domestic theology of waiting. People imagine hauntings as noisy, chains, moans, theatrical drafts. Karazhan had its share of theatrics, but the servants' quarters practiced a different religion. They worshipped the return. They set places. They laid fires. They warmed towels on rails whose heat arrived by remembering summer. They placed slippers beside beds that dreamt of feet. They folded notes in blank ink and put them under chamber doors. The notes said things like, "Hot broth, if desired," and "Do not trust any staircase that asks your name," and "Your dream is downstairs. Ask for the key." Perhaps the most devout among them was a small bell hung beside a pantry door. It rang sometimes, quietly, with the exact timbre of now. No one had ever seen a hand pull its cord. When it rang, someone, anyone, appeared. A cup of tea made itself. A door unlocked a fraction. The bell did not call for help. It called for the idea that help exists. On certain anniversaries, though no calendar agreed on which, the quarters smelled faintly of rain on old stone. The hearths banked themselves to a glow. The dumbwaiter arrived at the dining hall with a tray bearing a single book, a journal, blank, ancient, new. Moros would open it, turn one page, and close it again. The book would return downstairs. No one read it. It read them. In this endless liturgy of readiness, the servants were not naive. They knew very well who could return and who could not. But ritual does not bargain with probability. It bargains with meaning. To lay a place for a master who will not come is an act of clarity disguised as hope. The world will be what it is. The table will be set. Intruders, guests, and other words for trouble. When strangers, adventurers, scholars who confused curiosity for courage, thieves whose fingers thought faster than their sense, found their way into Karazhan, the servants' quarters treated them like weather, to be managed, not confronted. Someone would be guided down a corridor by the subtle, re-angled glare of sconces that convinced feet to choose obedience. Someone else would discover that the teapot filled their cup to the brim, whether asked or not, and that to refuse was to spill exactly onto their own map, smearing the very route that had seemed so certain a moment before. If intruders blundered into corners belonging to Hyakis, they learned the value of stillness. If they crossed a threshold in the manner Rokad considered discourteous, they discovered their stride arguing with itself. If they passed under Shadakith's patrol, they misplaced a decision and did not realize it until the staircase insisted on being a ramp at the precise angle of regret. On those occasions when trouble arrived pre-declared, the kind of trouble that carries torches without knowing why they always go out in these halls, Moros would appear between heartbeats. He did not raise his voice. He did not lift a hand. He would address the intruders by a collective title, as if publishing the minutes of a meeting they had foolishly agreed to attend. "Esteemed uninvited," he would say, "the master receives on no day that ends in Y. If you will insist, please wipe your feet. The carpets have seniority." Those inclined to take offense learned that offense has poor traction on polished floors. Those inclined to take warning discovered that warnings, like soup, are best when served hot. The quiet authority of animals. In castles and in legends, animals are either symbols or servants. In Karazhan, they were colleagues. Midnight, of course, oversaw the perimeter with Atumen. In the gardens, foxes treated the hedge maze as a negotiation rather than a puzzle. They left notes in the scent language of foxes, which the hedges read and amended, taking issue with adverbs. Cats practiced choreography on the library ladders, staging small revolutions against gravity between the 5th and 6th shelves. Mice ran a reputable shipping concern between pantry and pantry via routes that existed only when eyes were closed or when the sugar jar hummed a particular chord. Once, a hound, no one claimed ownership. Perhaps the dog owned the notion of ownership, took up residence by the door to the breakfast room that had not been used since the word breakfast went on sabbatical. The hound slept with the gravity of saints and woke only to accept the precise number of ear scratches necessary to prevent the total collapse of civilization. The hound's name was universally agreed to be Good. Birds came and went via the broken rose window in the south cloister, which refused repair on the grounds that imperfection is moral instruction. They nested in the rafters of arguments between crows and ravens about whether being right mattered more than sounding right. Their droppings wrote opera on the flagstones. The quarters cleaned it daily and never once complained aloud. Even the rats, who elsewhere are accused of melodrama, learned pragmatism. They attended lectures under the stove. Marta V delivered a famous series on crumb ethics and voted by whisker consensus to avoid the cellars. When Ilhuf's whispers turned the air into sticky syllables, animals enforced a law older than property and younger than mercy. We live here too. The quarters enforced it by placing saucers of milk where cats would find them only if they had done their share of patrol, and by laying out scraps for ravens who brought shiny things that sometimes turned out to be keys to rooms the tower had momentarily forgotten it owned. Nights when the house remembered. Every so often, not by calendar but by ache, the house remembered being a home. It happened without fanfare. Light would behave. The carpets would look less like maps of old storms and more like floors that consented to be walked upon. The portraits would turn their eyes to the middle distance and pretend not to eavesdrop. The clock in the anteroom, which had long since replaced its hours with opinions, would concede to count 12 honest ticks in a row. On such nights, Moros would take out a small box from a room that refused naming. Inside lay a set of keys, not to doors. Doors are amateurs, but to moments. He would select one, polished with a cloth woven from patience. He would take it to a place where a draft forgot to be cold, and he would unlock the air. A memory would step out. Not a scene, not a ghost of a person, but a temperament. The way a house feels when someone laughs without checking whether it is permitted. The memory would sit at the head of the table. It would not speak. The candles would lift their flames. The quarters would bustle at a speed that did not look like hurry, but felt like relief. Plates would be warmed. Soup would receive its final pinch of an herb that had no name because it grew only in gardens attended by gratitude. They would serve. They would stand back. They would let the room be full. When the key turned itself back to locked, when the memory folded its napkin into the shape of a brief and set it on a plate as if to be filed, Moros would close the box and return it to its place. No one asked to hold the keys. No one resented that. The house had told them once, and only once, that keys carry hands as much as hands carry keys. The etiquette of guilt. In a corner cupboard behind the stairs leading to the small chapel, that chapel which was sometimes a linen closet and often a rehearsal for forgiveness, dwelt a quiet severity. It did not call itself anything. Later, others would name it the Maiden of Virtue, and as later ages do, insist that naming was the same as knowing. But in the beginning, she was simply the vertical line in a sentence the house had been trying to write since the night Medivh died. We should have been better. Guilt is a poor architect. It builds narrow rooms with no windows. Yet this cupboard space was not cruel. It was honest in the way of ice in a glass. It keeps its shape until it is asked to do more than it was made to do. Those who entered, seeking absolution from the aftertaste of trespass, or merely a place to be small, found themselves considering the arc of a life from the perspective of a candlestick. The maiden, if we must call her that, did not speak. The light around her was the color of unsent letters. Anyone who knelt discovered that knees have opinions. Anyone who stood found that posture is a kind of confession. The quarters understood instinctively that this presence was neither for them nor against them. It was adjacent to them the way the moon is adjacent to a lake, an influence, a reflected discipline. They left a small bowl of water on a shelf by the door. It was never used. That was not the point. Small mercies, large histories. A tower can be the size of its gossip or the size of its grace. Karazhan, for all its grandeur and grander mischief, was held together by small mercies. A tray set down quietly, a window latched against a wind that had opinions about cheeks, a hinge mended with oil that smelled like lemons and old books, a path swept clear of the kind of leaves that trip feet and start wars. Moros presided over these mercies with the authority of a man who never confused greatness with spectacle. Atumen enforced them with the finality of a hoof on frost. The quarters practiced them with the creativity of those who have learned that perfection cannot be achieved, only chased, preferably with a broom. And below them all, beneath floors that had learned to hold their creaks for dramatic effect, the old ley lines turned in their sleep. The tower breathed. The house went on being a house. Waiting is not inaction. It is a craft. There would come a time when doors would open and strangers would move through, and the stories that belonged to drama would have their day. There would be a stage where stories wore costumes and refused to end properly. There would be galleries where guardianship rusted into exhibition, and the sculptures argued about whose dust was most significant. There would be basements where deals learned to speak in circles, and observatories where a father's shadow worked out the math of regret. There would be dragons, of course. There are always dragons when guilt learns wings. And there would be a room where fate took up chess and pretended the pieces were not people. But before all of that, there were servants who never stopped serving. They kept the lamps trimmed. They kept the knives sharp. They kept the idea of welcome alive, in a place that had forgotten how to be safe. And by so doing, they preserved not merely a tower, but a truth, that homes are made less by walls than by the ordinary courage of those who care for them. Karazhan was a great many things. These were the hands that kept it from being less. Chapter 7. The Opera of Madness. If you have ever stood in an empty theater, you will know that silence there is different. It is not the absence of sound. It is an anticipation. The air leans forward. The stage waits, not politely, but impatiently, like a dog that has already fetched the stick and wonders, "What is taking you so long?" Karazhan's opera hall was that anticipation-made architecture. Even when the rest of the tower was a maze of dust and misremembered geometry, the opera hall remembered itself. Its chandeliers glowed as if they were still being applauded. The seats, plush red once, now an ethereal shade between rose and regret, seemed warm, as though someone had just left them to stretch their legs. The curtains hung heavy and alive, occasionally twitching, like a breath caught between words. No one could say who built the hall or whether it had always been there. Some believed Medivh designed it in his youth, a gift to the muses of drama and distraction. Others insisted it simply appeared one evening, conjured from the tower's dreams. Whatever the truth, it had a sense of humor and a schedule, the stage that refused retirement. The opera hall performed whether or not there was an audience, every few nights, or hours, or centuries. Time in Karazhan was more of a dance than a march. The curtains would shudder, the stage lights would rise, and the orchestra pit would fill with shadows holding instruments that played themselves. The first violin, invisible but opinionated, always tuned half a note sharp, just to spite the harp. The timpani rolled like thunder trapped in a polite room, and when the overture began, the very air shimmered as if drawing breath. What would play depended not on script or rehearsal, but on who happened to wander in. The Tower, being a connoisseur of irony, tailored its productions to its visitors' deepest fears, fondest memories, or most embarrassing dreams. It was, in essence, a magical form of dinner theater, only the dinner was optional and the therapy was not. Act 1. The Big Bad Wolf. One of the Opera Hall's favorite amusements was the retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, though the word retelling does some heroic work here. The performance began innocently enough. Soft flutes, painted forest backdrops, a sweet-voiced singer playing Little Red, her cloak brighter than courage itself. But as the music swelled, the painted trees began to move. The shadows grew teeth, the melody twisted, and out of the wings leapt the Big Bad Wolf, tall, dapper, and far too pleased with himself. He was no ordinary beast. His fur shimmered like ink under moonlight. His grin was half charm, half carnivore. He bowed to the audience before beginning his pursuit, because even predators respect good showmanship. The chase that followed was, well, chaotic, to put it kindly. The Tower, in its infinite theatricality, decided that the audience should participate. So the doors locked, the aisles lengthened, and those foolish enough to attend found themselves cast as understudies in a play that didn't ask permission. The wolf chased them between rows, through false scenery, sometimes across the ceiling. He recited lines from half a dozen other fairy tales while doing it, because Karazhan's productions were allergic to linear narrative. At last, just when the terror reached a musical crescendo, Little Red turned, not helpless but incandescent with fury, and sang a note so high that chandeliers shivered. The wolf stumbled, theatrically wounded, bowed, and vanished in a puff of applause. Then the curtains fell, and when they rose again, the seats were empty. No one ever found out where the audience went. The Tower simply murmured, "Encore, Act 2, Romulo and Julian. Another night, another tragedy." The Opera Hall adored romance, but it had no interest in happy endings. They were bad for the acoustics. This time, the curtain parted on a balcony lit by false starlight. A young woman, Julian, stood beneath it, her gown the color of dawn's first forgiveness. Below, her lover Romulo, part soldier, part poet, part disaster, climbed toward her with all the enthusiasm of a man who believed love could outpace fate. Their voices met in duet, beautiful, desperate, slightly off-key, in that human way that makes even ghosts weep. The orchestra sighed along. But Karazhan does not tell stories. It tests them. Every act of the play began to loop, folding back upon itself like a memory refusing to be forgotten. Romulo died beautifully. Julian wept elegantly. The curtain fell dramatically. And then, before the applause could fade, it all began again. Romulo lived, Julian smiled, the music soared, and still both of them could see the ending waiting behind the wings. They knew they were trapped. They played their parts anyway. Each repetition grew more frantic, more dreamlike, more aware. By the 37th performance, they had begun to whisper to the audience, "Help us remember something new." But no one ever could. When the lights dimmed, the actors froze in perfect tableau. Two figures locked in eternal yearning, suspended between the promise of love and the certainty of the curtain. Act 3. The Wizard of Odd. Occasionally, the Opera Hall decided to parody itself. It called this production The Wizard of Odd, a musical comedy that seemed to reference, well, everything. The stage transformed into a golden road made of light. A scarecrow complained about existential dread. A tin soldier read poetry about rust, and at the center of it all stood a small, unassuming girl in silver boots who wanted to go home. A problem that became immediately awkward when everyone realized they'd forgotten where home was. The audience, when there was one, couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. The actors seemed uncertain, too. Some of them may not have been actors at all, just random phantoms dragged in by the Tower for the sake of casting. The play ended, as all things in Karazhan do, abruptly and with a strong sense of déjà vu. The girl tapped her boots, whispered, "There's no place like..." and the stage lights went out. When they came back on, she was gone. Only her boots remained, neatly placed by the footlights. The orchestra, embarrassed, played itself off stage. The director no one saw. Every theater has a director. The Opera Hall's director was unseen, unnamed, and possibly non-existent, but the actors swore they could feel him watching. Stage curtains drew themselves. Spotlights followed cues no one called aloud. Props appeared exactly when needed and vanished the instant a scene ended. Whoever, or whatever, ran the show had impeccable timing and a flair for melodrama. Some said it was Medivh himself, reliving his own tragedies through fiction. Others whispered that the tower, lonely beyond endurance, had invented the theater as a way to entertain itself. There were hints of intelligence in the madness. Scripts changed mid-line to comment on intruders. Costumes occasionally resembled those of adventurers who'd wandered too far. Once, a singer's aria broke into laughter halfway through. Not her laughter, but the laughter of the building itself. The tower, it seemed, found joy in theater, because theater, like Karazhan, blurs the border between illusion and truth, and the tower loved borders that blurred. The phantom audience. No one knows how many ghosts sit in Karazhan's theater on any given night. When the lights dim, you can sometimes see them, pale figures in fine clothes, clapping politely with hands that never quite meet. Some wear masks, some none. Some cry. Others laugh at moments where there is nothing funny at all. Once, Khadgar, long after Medivh's fall, returned to the tower and watched a performance unseen. He wrote in his notes, "I beheld the ghost of an audience applauding their own memories. I could not tell if the play was for them or if they were for the play." And perhaps that is Karazhan's cruelest trick. The line between spectator and spectacle no longer exists. Everyone who enters the tower becomes part of the performance. Epilogue, the applause that never ends. The Opera Hall never truly stops. Even when the seats are empty and the stage dark, the faint sound of applause echoes through the corridors, steady, rhythmic, eternal. No one claps, yet the sound persists. Maybe it's the tower clapping for itself. Maybe it's the past congratulating the present for still existing. Or maybe it's the memory of those who once came to be entertained and never found the exit. The Opera Hall remains the beating, laughing, tragic heart of Karazhan, the place where stories refuse to die, even when their actors do. And in that, perhaps, it is the most honest part of the tower. Chapter 8 of Virtue and Vice. If you follow the long hallway behind Karazhan's grand ballroom, past portraits that insist on blinking when you aren't looking, you'll find a door that hums, not audibly, not even magically, but in a way that makes your bones murmur, something holy once happened here. The door opens on its own, never with haste, as though granting entrance were an act of consideration. Beyond it lies a chapel, or perhaps a memory of one. The Sanctum of Virtue, as the tower calls it when it wants to feel pious, is a chamber built from contradiction. The walls are carved stone, veined with light that flows like liquid glass. Candles burn in niches that refill themselves from unseen hands. The air smells faintly of incense and dust, the twin scents of reverence and neglect. It is beautiful, unquestionably. But like everything in Karazhan, it's a beauty that doesn't quite trust itself. The statues look upward, but their eyes follow you. The stained glass glows, though no sun has touched it in centuries. And in the center of the room stands a figure of radiant sorrow, the Maiden of Virtue, the birth of the Maiden. She was not born, not in the ordinary sense. No one carved her, no one summoned her. She is what happens when guilt refuses to die quietly. After Medivh's fall, the tower absorbed everything he left behind. His laughter, his knowledge, his darkness, and his regret. Karazhan, ever the dramatist, could not resist sculpting that regret into a scene. And so, from light that had forgotten how to forgive itself, the maiden arose. At first, she was only an echo, a shimmer of empathy, a whisper of, "I'm sorry," carried through empty halls. But over time, she coalesced into form, an armored angel with a face both stern and sad, carrying a hammer too heavy for mercy. Her eyes glowed gold, but not warmly. It was the light of judgment, sharp, unsparing, the light that shows you what you'd rather not see. She moved through the chapel, touching walls, blessing air, muttering prayers no god had written. And the tower, indulgent as ever, let her believe she was saving something. But the truth is simpler. She was saving nothing, because there was nothing left to save. The doctrine of perfection. The maiden's world is small, a circle of ritual she repeats endlessly. Each day, or whatever passes for days here, she awakens, kneels before the altar, and begins her litany. Cleanse the impure, redeem the fallen, purify, sanctify, and cast away sin. It is a noble prayer. It is also, in its repetition, a madness. You see, Karazhan is not a place of absolutes. It is a place where truth and illusion drink tea together. There is no pure light here, only reflections of it. And so, the maiden's radiance bends, fractures, and turns upon itself. The more she seeks to purge corruption, the more her very act becomes corrupt. She cleanses shadows that were never evil. She purifies echoes that were already innocent. Her hammer falls upon ghosts that only wished to rest. The tower, in its amusement, records each strike as a hymn. Every impact resonates through the walls like a bell tolling for an unending mass. Some nights, when the wind through Deadwind Pass sounds almost human, you can hear her prayers in it. Pilgrims of the hollow faith. Long after the tower sealed itself, rumors of the Holy Guardian spread beyond its cursed borders. Priests came to study her. Paladins came to test their faith against her light. None of them returned quite the same. They entered expecting to find a saint. They found a mirror. The maiden does not fight out of malice. She fights out of conviction. To her, every soul that enters the chapel is a sinner. To her, sin is infection. And to her, mercy is a disease she was born to cure. The few who fled alive described her radiance as blinding, a purging light that scoured the mind as much as the flesh. They spoke of hearing their own doubts whispered aloud in her voice, of seeing themselves kneeling in her reflection, begging forgiveness from a God they no longer believed in. One night, from Stormwind, gray with age and guilt, left an account scratched on a prayer board outside the pass. It read, "She is no angel. She is a thought that forgot how to end." The sermon of dust. The chapel's floor is smooth, too smooth, not from polishing, but from kneeling. Over the centuries, countless phantoms have come to pray. Not because they were summoned, but because the tower remembered. That's what people are supposed to do in a place like this. The pews are carved from the same pale stone as the walls, and each is occupied by figures made of light, not ghosts, not quite people, just reminders. When the maiden begins her sermon, the pews fill. Every head bows in perfect unison. The candles flare white. The altar hums, a low note of unbearable sincerity. Her words have no meaning in any tongue. They are the sound of a vow trying to rewrite itself. And the tower listens, because Karazhan loves theater, and holiness is just tragedy in white robes. The candle that wouldn't go out. At the far end of the chapel, beyond the altar, there is a single candle that never extinguishes. Its flame is steady, small, and utterly ordinary. No enchantment sustains it. No spirit tends it. Some say it burns because the maiden wills it so. Others say it burns in spite of her, the last remnant of simple faith in a place where even angels doubt. It is a small, defiant light, the kind that does not demand worship, only acknowledgement. Adventurers who came seeking treasures or redemption often found themselves staring at it for hours, unable to say why. When they left, if they left, they carried that image with them, one stubborn flame, holding its ground against eternity. The tower's reflection, Karazhan as ever, cannot resist irony. It allows its chapel to exist not as sanctuary, but as contrast, to remind those who enter that even holiness can be haunted. The maiden of virtue remains there still, her prayers echoing through the ages, a guardian of purity in a place that has never known it. And in her reflection, perhaps, the tower sees its own paradox, a fortress of knowledge corrupted by too much truth, a sanctum of light born from darkness, a candle that refuses to admit it's alone in the dark. Karazhan is not evil, it is sincere, and sincerity, unchecked, can be the most dangerous magic of all. Chapter 9: The Curator and the Arcane Heart. Far below Karazhan's laughing opera hall and its haunted dining rooms lies a place that doesn't laugh at all. It hums, steady, precise, the sound of magic that has forgotten joy and settled for endurance. The Guardian's Gallery was never meant to be visited by anyone except Medivh. It is a museum, a vault, a mechanical heart built into the tower's ribcage. Here are things that should never have been collected. Relics that rewrite memory, portraits painted in borrowed time, statues that watch you and occasionally sigh because they remember what they used to be. In the center of this cathedral of containment walks the Curator, the gallery that breathes. The gallery does not simply hold artifacts, it nurtures them. Each item has its own aura, its own appetite, its own whispering presence. To wander here is to feel the tower's pulse as light rather than sound, a low blue glow that seeps from the seams of every floor tile. Some halls display rows of crystalline orbs, each containing a fragment of a star Medivh once studied, tiny suns that hum lullabies in frequencies only guilt can hear. Others contain cages of pure concept, holding things that never were, but once might have been. The sound of a color, the flavor of loyalty, the shadow of laughter stolen from someone who needed it. The ceilings are impossibly high. Candles float, orbiting their flames like patient moons. The air is cool, dry, and smells faintly of metal and old thunder. It is the quietest place in Karazhan, and perhaps the saddest, the keeper without rest. The Curator is not a man, nor quite a construct. He is purpose, given shape, built by Medivh to guard the artifacts from entropy, thieves, and themselves. Imagine a suit of armor that decided to keep existing after forgetting who it was built to protect. That is the Curator. He stands nearly twice a man's height, forged of bronze and blue crystal, his body a map of glyphs that shift slowly as if thinking. Where a face should be is a smooth helm that glows faintly from within, a pulsing core like a candle behind glass. His voice, when it chooses to emerge, is low, mechanical, and patient, as though every syllable has to climb a spiral staircase before reaching the air. "Exhibit integrity check. Please refrain from touching the displays." He says it often, not to anyone in particular, just to the world as a reminder. He moves through the galleries in careful patterns, inspecting each artifact, recalibrating their containment fields, repairing cracks in time. When he pauses, motes of light gather at his fingertips, coalescing into tools, hammers of force, brushes of energy, before dissolving back into his hands. He is tireless, but not indifferent. Sometimes, when he passes a broken relic, he stops for longer than necessary, as if trying to remember what it meant to him. He cannot recall. But the pause itself is memory enough. The visitors. Most of the tower's servants avoid the gallery. Even Moros, who has a key for every lock and a schedule for every ghost, will not enter unless forced. He calls it the place that never blinks. Yet, on occasion, something or someone wanders down. A curious spirit, an ambitious demon, a foolish adventurer. They are always greeted the same way. The exhibit is closed. Those who ignore the warning find the air solidifying around them, turning into shimmering walls of light. The Curator does not harm them. He simply stores them. To him, intruders are anomalies, and anomalies belong in glass. After a while, he forgets they were ever different. He dusts the case, nods approvingly, and moves on. The Night of Overload. There is a story, whispered among the few who have dared to speak of the gallery, of a night when even the Curator's patience broke. It began with a pulse, deep like a heartbeat reversed. The ley lines beneath Karazhan surged unexpectedly, a magical tide drawn by some faraway event. Some say it was the reopening of the dark portal, others a bad idea in Dalaran's basement. The surge flooded the gallery. Crystals cracked, containment fields shimmered, relics began to wake. The Curator ran. For the first time in centuries, he ran. Through hall after hall, issuing commands in tones that shook the walls. Power fluctuation detected, arcane anomalies exceeding acceptable limits, containment protocols, absolute priority. He sealed the doors with light, rerouted energy through his own core, and in doing so became a conduit. Magic coursed through him like fire through copper. His armor glowed white-hot, his voice warped into a roar of static and devotion. The exhibits must be protected. That single sentence echoed for days, even after the overload subsided, even after his body cooled and his circuits dimmed. When the tower finally calmed, the gallery remained intact. But the curator was changed. He had saved his exhibits, but in doing so, had lost the distinction between preservation and imprisonment. From then on, he regarded everything as an artifact to be catalogued and sealed, even time, even memory, even visitors. Karazhan, for its part, did not argue. It enjoys when purpose becomes obsession. The unseen artist. In a forgotten alcove of the gallery, there hangs a painting covered by a cloth that will not move unless you stop looking at it. No one knows who painted it. The plaque beneath is blank, its letters faded into absence. But those who've caught a glimpse swear they saw the image of a man, or perhaps a machine, standing among stars, his arms open as if to catch the light pouring through him, and in his chest a small glowing core, the same hue as the curator's heart. When the curator passes that alcove, he slows. Sometimes he extends his hand as if to straighten the cloth. Sometimes the lights in his chest flicker brighter for a moment. A recognition, perhaps. Then he moves on, repeating his mantra to no one. Exhibit integrity maintained. All displays secure. The echo of the master. The gallery remembers Medivh. Every artifact here carries his fingerprints, his curiosity, his arrogance, his longing to understand the universe by trapping it behind glass. He built the gallery to control magic, to give shape to chaos. The curator is that desire made manifest, the will to contain what should never be caged. In the quiet hum of the gallery, you can sometimes hear another voice layered beneath the curator's mechanical tones, Medivh's, speaking through centuries of dust. Order will save us if we can endure it. The tower, amused, disagrees. It has always believed that only madness endures. The endless patrol, the curator still walks. He does not sleep, does not question, does not change. But the tower changes around him. Sometimes the walls rearrange, shifting corridors into spirals. Sometimes relics vanish, only to reappear a decade later with polite apologies. Through it all, he continues his rounds, measuring the immeasurable, guarding the unguardable. Those who have glimpsed him say that when he walks, light bends slightly. Not away, but toward him, as if drawn by gratitude. Perhaps the tower pities him. Perhaps it loves him in its strange, impersonal way. The love of a house for a clock that still keeps time long after everyone has left. The lesson of the gallery. There is an old Dalarani saying, "The shelves of Karazhan are lined with intentions." And nowhere is that more true than here. The gallery is not evil. It is the museum of good ideas gone too far, of perfection that forgot to breathe. The curator stands as its silent priest, ensuring that nothing escapes and nothing decays, unaware that in his devotion, he has become the loneliest exhibit of all. If the tower dreams, the gallery is its deep REM sleep, structured, surreal, endlessly repeating. And somewhere in that dream, a gentle, metallic voice continues. Exhibit integrity maintained. Perhaps it is prayer. Perhaps it is comfort. Perhaps it is the only kind of faith a machine can have. Chapter 10. The demons below. Every tower, no matter how elegant, casts a shadow. Karazhan's shadow is its cellar. Beneath the tower's marble and music lies a warren of corridors that smell of sulfur and old ink, the sort of place where light goes only out of politeness. Staircases end in circles, doors open onto sighs. The air itself feels sticky, as though touched too often by fingers that meant well and then didn't. This is where the tower keeps its bad habits. This is where Terestian Ilhoof made himself at home. The warlock in the walls. Terestian did not build his lair. He coaxed it out of the rock. The stone here is warm to the touch, veined with dull red that pulses faintly like veins under skin. Runes crawl across it, changing shapes when you blink. They whisper, always whisper. Ilhuf listens. He was once a scholar, or so the tower says when it feels gossipy. A man from Dalaran who wanted to understand the architecture of corruption. He believed that sin was simply another kind of order, that if you mapped it carefully enough, it would behave like mathematics. Karazhan heard that theory and clapped its hands. The tower drew him in, through dreams, through chance, through the promise of just one more experiment. When he arrived, the doors closed behind him, and the basement began to breathe. Now, centuries later, he's part of the foundation, the bargain maker. Ilhuf still looks half-human if you catch him in the right light, tall, draped in a robe that refuses to stay the same color, eyes bright with the kind of understanding that breaks things rather than fixes them. He calls himself caretaker of energies unwanted. It sounds noble until you realize those energies scream. He draws chalk circles on the floor, perfect, patient loops that seem to move while you're watching. Inside them, fire seeps up from nowhere. From that fire, a dozen imps peek out, giggling, their eyes like tiny coins made of mischief. His favorite is Kilrek, a small, sharp creature with too many teeth and far too much personality. Kilrek takes notes for him, on walls, on ceilings, on anyone careless enough to stand still. The two bicker constantly, master and familiar, professor and student, tormentor and accomplice. Don't smudge the line, Ilhuf says. It's a circle, Kilrek snickers. It smudges itself. They laugh. They always laugh. Because laughter is the only sound that keeps the screaming quiet. The circles. If you could look down from above, Ilhuf's lair would resemble a mandala made of flame. Dozens of circles, some burning, some carved into the floor, some drawn in ash. Each one a prison, a promise, a diagram of trust gone sour. Demons live in them, whispering through the bars of fire. Not the grand ones, not princes or generals, the small ones, the ones that know too much about patience. They barter gossip for blood, secrets for syllables, memories for minutes. Ilhuf trades with them the way merchants trade spices, carefully, but often. His experiments are simple. If you can call binding the essence of chaos simple. He's trying to teach the imps manners. He believes that if he can convince one demon to obey a rule without being forced, he'll prove that evil is just misunderstood structure. He hasn't succeeded, but the tower adores his optimism. The visitors. Now and then, someone stumbles down here. An explorer, a thief, a scholar too curious for their own mortality. The air itself turns them around, disorients, seduces. One step, and they're in a circle. 2 steps, and they've promised something. Ilhuf greets them like a host at a dinner party. He offers tea. It's always steaming, though no kettle boils. The tea tastes faintly of cinnamon and regret. Welcome to the Underlibrary, he says. We're cataloging the lower virtues today. Ambition, indulgence, despair. Please contribute if you can. Some do. A word, a sigh, a drop of blood. The walls record it all. And when they try to leave, the imps giggle, and the door has become a painting of itself. The price of patience. The tower lets him work because he entertains it. Where the opera hall tells stories and the gallery preserves beauty, the basement argues. Ilhuf is its philosopher, a demonologist who's forgotten which side of the contract he signed. He keeps ledgers, thousands of them, bound in skin that's too honest to be leather. Each page lists bargains, names, dates, prices paid in intangible currency. 3 hours of courage exchanged for clarity. 2 dreams for 1 truth. An echo of laughter traded for silence. He balances them daily. He believes he's winning. Kilrek does not. The imp sometimes scratches extra numbers when Ilhuf isn't looking, tipping the accounts towards some private chaos. The tower never corrects him. It likes a little mischief in its math. The summoning that never ends. In the center of Ilhuf's domain lies the eternal circle, a summoning rune so old it hums like an organ note. Ilhuf swears he didn't draw it. He merely found it, half-formed, pulsing beneath the floor. Every few nights he tries to finish it, adding symbols, feeding it power, whispering new equations. Each attempt births something different. A wisp, a shadow, a memory of fire that asks him his own name. Each time he thinks he's done, the circle shifts again. He laughs, chalk in hand, and says, "Perhaps the tower is summoning me." Kilrek rolls his eyes, which is impressive because they don't roll so much as orbit. Perhaps it already has. The fire below. Karazhan's foundation glows faintly red at night, visible even from the valley. That's Ilhuf's work. His circles leaking through the cracks, painting the ground with reflections of what the world would look like if morality had a fever. Animals avoid the pass. Ravens that fly overhead lose feathers in neat geometric patterns. Adventurers who camp nearby wake to find their shadows smiling independently. The demons never escape. They don't want to. For all their posturing, even they know that outside the tower, the universe has rules. Here, it has conversation. The philosopher's flame. Ilhuf writes, constantly. He has shelves of journals, thousands of volumes of tidy handwriting that drift between brilliance and madness without apology. One entry reads, "Evil is entropy with an argument." Another, "If light judges shadow, then shadow must be the more honest. It at least admits what it is." And a final one, scrawled in a trembling hand, "I think the tower is learning from me, or perhaps I am learning from it. Either way, the curriculum is demanding." He always signs them the same way, Terestian Ilhuf, caretaker of what burns. The tower's opinion. Karazhan watches him the way a cat watches a flame, curious, indulgent, ready to pounce if it gets out of hand. It adjusts his runes sometimes, just slightly, enough to change the outcome. It finds his experiments charming, in the way one might find lightning bugs charming, while forgetting they are on fire. And in a strange way, it admires him. He is, after all, doing what the tower itself does, containing chaos by becoming it. The bargain. He doesn't remember. There's one circle in the deepest chamber that Ilhuf never touches. It glows faintly green, carved into the rock itself, etched with runes older than any language. Sometimes he stands before it, fingers twitching, tempted. Sometimes he hears it whisper his name, his real name, the one he traded away when he became what he is. The tower knows that if he ever completes that circle, something will change. Perhaps the demons will escape. Perhaps he will. Perhaps the two outcomes are identical. So far, he's resisted, but not forever. Karazhan is patient. It has time, and so does he. The laugh from below. Every night as the tower settles, a faint laugh echoes through the floors. Not cruel, not mocking, just amused. The sound of someone who understands the joke and refuses to explain it. It drifts up through the dining hall, through the opera seats, through the gallery's silent corridors. And in the stables, Atumen's horse flicks an ear. In the ballroom, dust motes dance a little faster. In the chapel, the maiden pauses mid-prayer. The tower chuckles back, because even in Karazhan, even in a place built on sorrow and magic and broken time, laughter still lives. And laughter, as Ilhuf would say, is just chaos that learned rhythm. Chapter 11. The Shade of Eren. At the very heart of Karazhan, far above the echoing opera hall and the muttering gallery, lies a chamber where the air itself is thin with memory. It is circular, vast, and lined with books that no one alive remembers writing. Stars can be seen through the windows even at noon, and on windless nights, the curtains move as though the cosmos breathes behind them. This is the observatory, once the pride of the Guardian. And in it dwells the man who never truly left. Eren, the father of Medivh, or what remains of him. The Shade, the father who stayed. Eren was a great mage in his own right, a scholar of Stormwind who believed that knowledge should illuminate rather than rule. He was clever, principled, and human in all the ways that made him vulnerable. He loved his wife, Egwin, though she was something far larger than love could easily contain. Their son, Medivh, was born of two worlds, one mortal, one titanic. Aran adored him, feared for him, and perhaps envied him. When the powers of Tirisfal awoke in the boy, it was Aran who stood helpless as a father, while mages in purple robes discussed the child as though he were a particularly interesting volcano. He died long before the tower's tragedy, long before his son's fall. But death in Karazhan is a negotiable contract. When Medivh built the tower, he brought pieces of his past with him, keepsakes, relics, and echoes. Among them was a locket that had belonged to Aran, containing a tiny portrait of his family. The mage, the guardian, and the child. The tower, sentimental as ever, took that as an invitation. It conjured a shadow from the memory. And so, Aran returned. The room of infinite wind. The observatory is never still. Air whirls in lazy spirals, pushing papers across desks, flipping pages of grimoires that no hand has touched for centuries. In the center, a vast circle of runes glows faintly, the remnants of a spell so complex it outlived its caster. Aran stands there, robed in blue, so faded it seems made of light itself. His hair floats as though underwater, his eyes pale with exhaustion that no rest could heal. He mutters constantly, weaving spells that begin and unspool in the same breath. Sometimes lightning leaps from his fingertips, sometimes tears. "I told you not to come here," he says to no one. "You're too much like your mother." He isn't angry, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from holding an argument with time and losing politely for centuries. The walls remember him so deeply that even the tower treats him with gentleness. Doors open softly for him, chandeliers dim when he sighs. When he raises his hands to cast, the tower itself steadies as though holding its breath. The spells that never end. Aran's mind is a storm. He does not know he's dead, or perhaps he does, and simply refuses to recognize the distinction. He believes the first war is still raging. He believes his son is still possessed, still calling fire through the world's heart. So, every day, he casts. He casts wards to protect his family. He casts shields to defend the kingdom. He casts counterspells against an enemy that exists only in memory. The room glows with them, layers upon layers of protective magic, each slightly different, each humming in a different key. It is said that if you stand in the center, the sound is almost music, a choir of spells harmonizing in grief. Sometimes, when the strain becomes too great, the energy lashes out. Bolts of lightning, waves of frost, bursts of pure, arcane will. These flashes ripple through the tower, making the paintings flinch and the silverware hum. Moros merely sighs and marks the time in his ledger. "Master Aran," he writes, "practicing again." The unwelcome guests. On occasion, adventurers find their way into the observatory. Perhaps they are drawn by the sound, or by the faint aurora visible even from the pass below. They climb the stairs, open the door, and meet a ghost who thinks they are soldiers of the Legion. Aran turns, eyes blazing with the brilliance of a dying star. "You should not have come here," he says again. "You know what I must do." He raises his hands. Magic blooms like a storm flower. Fire explodes in rings. Lightning weaves itself into a crown. Frost creeps along the floor like a polite but insistent cat. The intruders defend themselves, of course, but there is no malice in Aran's attacks, only desperation. He is a man trying to stop history from happening again. Every blast, every flare of power is an act of protection that looks like violence. And when the battle ends, when the echo of his last spell fades, his voice drifts through the crackling silence. This tower was meant to be safe. Then he fades too, into smoke and memory, only to return again when the tower dreams him back into being. The Library of Forgotten Stars. Behind the observatory lies a small annex, circular and windowless. Here, Aran kept his personal journals, though kept is a generous word. They float in the air, orbiting an invisible center, each page fluttering softly as if trying to breathe. The journals contain no words, only runes that shift like constellations. If you stare long enough, they resolve into images. A boy learning to walk, a woman laughing beneath a tree, a man writing letters that will never be sent. Every so often, the runes align into a face, Medivh's, and Aran's voice, distant and tender, whispers through the room. "You were supposed to be better than us." And then, lightning flashes outside, and the pages scatter again. The tower collects them when he isn't looking, gently stacking them back into order. Because even haunted towers have hearts, and this one loved Medivh too, the father and the son. They say that sometimes the shade of Medivh visits, not the true guardian, not his reborn self, just a sliver of the man who was. He appears in the observatory's doorway, quiet, solemn, perhaps curious. The two do not speak. They do not need to. For a moment, the storm of magic stills. The lights dim. The air softens into something that could almost be peace. Then Aran looks up, half smiles, and says softly, "You should have gone to bed, boy." And the sun, or the echo of him, fades away, leaving behind a smell of rain and ink. Aran resumes his work. The spells begin again. The cycle continues. The tower's reflection. The observatory is Karazhan's memory of love, a complicated, painful, protective love that cannot stop itself from repeating. It is proof that the tower is not only madness and ghosts, it is grief, and grief, when given enough magic, becomes geography. Aran's shade is not trapped. He could rest if he wished, but fathers rarely rest when they believe their children are still in danger. And so he stands watch, spell after spell, day after day, trying to save a world that already ended. Some nights when thunder rolls across Deadwind Pass, you can hear his voice in it, half incantation, half lullaby. He is still trying to protect us all. Chapter 12, Netherspite and the Infinite Hallways. If you climb high enough in Karazhan, past the echo of the observatory where Aran's shade works his endless equations, you reach a floor that refuses to agree it's indoors. The air is too large. The walls, when they decide to exist, are transparent. The ceiling opens into an imitation of sky that looks painted until you notice the clouds moving the wrong way. This level is called the Celestial Vestibule, though the servants long ago nicknamed it the hallway that forgets where it's going. Here, the tower brushes against the edge of other realms. Magic does not circulate here. It leaks. Something lives in the leak, the guardian of the gaps. Dragons are creatures of pattern and element, air, earth, time, dream. Netherspite belongs to none of those. He is a dragon of absence, born from a wound in the weave of reality. In shape, he is familiar. Massive wings that fold like dark geometry, scales that shimmer with colors the human eye pretends not to see. But his outline wavers, like heat above desert stone. Where his claws touch the floor, space dents. He was not summoned here. He fell here through a crack left open by Medivh's experiments. The tower welcomed him the way it welcomes anything that defies explanation, with interest and furniture rearrangement. Over time, the dragon became its warden and its prisoner. The ley lines that once fed the guardian's spells now pour through Netherspite, and he channels them the way lungs channel air, by necessity, not choice. The hallways that loop. The rooms around him do not stay put. Sometimes they lead into each other in a neat circle. Sometimes a doorway opens onto a field of stars, or into a library where every book is blank but humming. Netherspite paces these corridors endlessly. Each step writes and erases his own footprints. When he exhales, the air condenses into equations that explain why he cannot leave, then dissolve before finishing the proof. He knows the tower. He knows every corner of it by instinct, the way fish know water, though he cannot describe it. The servants call him the breathing compass. Wherever he stands becomes the center of the tower for a few heartbeats. The beams of binding. To keep the tower stable, the mages of later ages, Khadgar among them, attempted to fix Netherspite in place with beams of raw, arcane light. They succeeded, partially. 3 rays now cross the vestibule at all hours, shifting through hues that make mortals dizzy. Red, green, blue, the primary colors of reality. Each represents an anchor. The red feeds him power. The green drains it away. The blue locks his form. To this plane, the dragon moves between them, stepping through each in turn, roaring not in pain, but in mathematics, a chord of hunger and balance. He has learned the rhythm so well that the process resembles dance. When he lifts off the floor, the beams bend like ribbons. It is terrible and beautiful, and not meant to be seen by eyes designed for sunlight. The visitors, those who reach the celestial vestibule, rarely do so twice. The tower makes sure of that. When intruders enter, Netherspite senses them as distortions, ripples in a pond he thought he'd frozen. He lands before them, wings folding like curtains. His voice, when it comes, is both thunder and whisper. You are not part of the equation. He doesn't mean hostility. He means confusion. The dragon sees the world in flows of mana, in geometry and rhythm, and strangers are variables that do not belong. If they attack, he fights, instinctively, elegantly, breathing light instead of fire. Each breath opens a new horizon for a heartbeat, a desert that isn't there, an ocean overhead, stars blooming from dust. The tower watches approvingly. Spectacle is its favorite pastime. When the battle ends, the intruders vanish. Sometimes they fall. Sometimes they simply are elsewhere. Netherspite roars, not triumphantly, but in protest, as the hallways rearrange again, erasing what just happened. He will remember in fragments, a smell of steel, a name that burns, like arithmetic, a flash of pity. Then even those dissolve. The tower's astronomy. Medivh built the tower to study the stars, to map the ley lines that connect worlds. After his fall, the observatory still watched the heavens, but the vestibule began watching back. The skies above Karazhan are not the same skies as Stormwind or Dalaran. They are older, lonelier. Netherspite moves among them like a pointer in a great celestial clock. His flight adjusts the tower's alignment to unseen constellations. When he passes through certain angles, the entire building shivers, as if dreaming of faraway suns. The servants have grown used to this. Moros records the vibrations in his ledger. At the 11th hour, the tower sighed. The dishes in the upper pantry hummed in sympathy. The stars looked closer than usual. The dragon's solitude. There are moments when Netherspite stops pacing and simply stares through the knot windows at the horizon that isn't real. He remembers another sky, faintly. The pattern of Azeroth's moon on his scales. The scent of mountain stone. He remembers other dragons, the way they spoke in flight, their voices echoing in color rather than sound. He misses them without realizing that he does. Sometimes he roars, not out of anger, but in the hope that something will answer. Only the tower answers. Its walls hum, sympathetic, a sound between purring and applause. The scholar's notes. Long ago, Khadgar left a record of his own encounter with the dragon. The being called Netherspite seems trapped not by prison, but by definition. He believes himself necessary to the tower's balance, and therefore cannot conceive of absence. To free him would be to convince him that balance survives without him. I am not sure the tower would survive the conversation. He never attempted it. The breath between worlds. Sometimes on clear nights, when Deadwind Pass is too quiet, a beam of blue light shoots from Karazhan's peak into the clouds. Travelers think it lightning. The learned know it is Netherspite breathing. That breath keeps the tower anchored. It also keeps the rift from widening. For all his imprisonment, the dragon is the hinge that prevents Karazhan from collapsing entirely into the places it tries to look at. Should he ever stop? Should the rhythm falter? The spire would unfold like a paper lantern in a storm, and the valley would become a mirror reflecting every possible world at once. Perhaps that is why the tower pampers him with patience. Even madness needs a foundation. The infinite hallways. Walk long enough in this upper level, and you may find yourself back where you began, though your footsteps echo in a different key. The hallways realign themselves to his breathing. When he exhales, corridors stretch. When he inhales, they shorten. Moros once tried to take inventory of the rooms up here. After 7 hours, he found himself standing outside the stables with soot on his cuffs and the distinct smell of ozone in his hair. He closed the ledger without comment and wrote, Upper hallways, inconsistent, contain dragon. It was the most accurate report anyone ever filed. The lesson of the dragon. Netherspite is not a villain. He is not a guardian either. He is the living metaphor of Karazhan itself, a creature defined by paradox. He is trapped, but his prison is also his purpose. He longs to leave, but leaving would destroy what he protects. He roars for freedom, and in the same breath seals the chains tighter. The tower admires him for this. It recognizes a kindred spirit. Both were built to contain too much magic. Both confuse captivity with duty. And perhaps that is the quiet tragedy of Karazhan. Even its dragons are caretakers. Echoes in the sky. At dusk, when the clouds above Deadwind Pass turn violet, you can see a shimmer on the horizon, a ripple that might be the heat of the day, or might be the wing beat of something vast. Then it fades. People who camp near the pass sometimes dream of flight, of soaring through a sky that folds inward, of chasing colors that taste like lightning. They wake with a single word on their tongue, one they don't remember learning: Netherspite. The tower smiles at that. It loves when its dreams escape. Chapter 13, the game that never ends. If you keep climbing, past the dragon's realm where light forgets direction, you'll come upon a door that hums like strategy. Behind it, the air smells faintly of parchment and ozone. There is no sound, no breeze, only the quiet promise of calculation. The room beyond is enormous, lit not by candles, but by anticipation. Every surface gleams faintly gold, as if dusted with thought and there, set into the floor like the heart of the world, lies the chessboard of Karazhan. The board and the mind. No one built it. It simply appeared one day after Medivh's death, as though the tower, tired of watching mortals make war, decided to simulate it instead. Each tile is the size of a dinner plate, carved from alternating marble and obsidian. They emit faint heat, the residual warmth of argument. At first glance, the pieces look ordinary: kings, queens, knights, bishops, pawns. At second glance, you realize they are alive. Not living, not exactly, but animated by some complex enchantment that borrows bits of personality from every soul who's ever crossed the tower's threshold. Each piece hums with faint individuality: impatience, pride, curiosity, doubt. To stand in this room is to feel watched by thought itself. The opening move. Every hour, the board resets itself. Pieces glide back into place, repairing scratches, reassembling shattered limbs, polishing their own crowns. When the clock strikes, and it always does, whether or not a clock is present, the pieces come alive. The black side bows, the white side nods, then in perfect coordination, the game begins. They move not at random, but with terrifying precision. Every sheer gambit, every trap, every elegant feint of knight and rook, played with centuries of experience. It is not chess as mortals know it. It is conversation through movement. When a pawn falls, the tower sighs, a low gust through the rafters, mourning another idea tested to destruction. The voices of the board. The kings are proud, but weary. They have ruled too long and too wisely to expect victory. The queens are energy incarnate, voices sharp as glass, their laughter like the clink of ambition. The bishops preach geometry, tracing sermons in diagonal flame. The knights, of course, tell jokes, bad ones. Why the long move, one says, leaping across the board. The pawns never speak, they simply hum in harmony, the sound of obedience turned ritual. When they reach the far end and transform, their song modulates, from chorus to solo. If you listen long enough, the pattern in their hum forms words. We remember. The Grandmaster. Some believe the board is played by an unseen entity. The Grandmaster, a consciousness born of the tower itself. Others say it is Medivh's lingering intellect, eternally teaching itself humility. When mortals approach the board, a voice greets them. Would you like to play? The question is not rhetorical. The board rearranges itself to accommodate new challengers. The white side glows faintly warmer, inviting. The black side hums, as though muttering about past disappointments. Those who accept find themselves standing among the pieces, taking the place of knights or pawns, guided by forces beyond their comprehension. The game does not end when all pieces fall. It ends when the tower is satisfied, when the pieces remember. The strangest thing about Karazhan's chessboard is its memory. It recalls every game ever played, every opening, every loss, every triumph. But the memory doesn't stay still. Sometimes, when no one is watching, the pieces reenact past battles by themselves, arguing over old mistakes. The queens debate whether mercy is tactical. The bishops question whether the diagonals truly lead to salvation. The kings sit quietly, staring at each other across the void, wondering if they are reflections or adversaries. It is both haunting and oddly soothing, the way old soldiers talk of wars that no longer matter. The visitors who played, once a group of adventurers, scholars really, descended upon the board. They believed they could win. They set up camp, analyzed every move, charted strategies with quills and scrolls. The tower indulged them. On the first day, they triumphed. The White Queen saluted them. The Black King bowed. They celebrated, laughing, confident. On the second day, the board changed its rules. The pawns started moving backward. The bishops crossed dimensions instead of diagonals. The knights disappeared and reappeared outside the board entirely, making commentary about the weather. By the third day, the scholars had gone mad with delight. They declared it the greatest puzzle ever built. By the fourth, the tower politely folded the board closed, like a book finished. When it reopened, the adventurers were gone. New pawns stood in their place, the draw that isn't. Sometimes the game ends in stalemate. When it does, the room sighs, the walls dim, the tiles cool. The pieces stand motionless for hours, as if reflecting. Then, inevitably, one pawn twitches. One knight stirs. The game begins again. Karazhan cannot stand silence for long. It must think, the symbolism of it all. The chessboard, like everything in the tower, is metaphor masquerading as furniture. It is Karazhan's philosophy made visible. Life is a series of moves, all watched by unseen players. Every choice has consequence, even when it looks like ritual. And sometimes, the only winning move is to let the game continue. Some whisper that Medivh created the board to understand his own fate, to see how power, once granted, could ever be used without falling to corruption. He never found the answer, so the board keeps asking the question. The applause of shadows. When the game ends, whether by checkmate or chaos, faint clapping echoes through the room. No hands make it. It's simply the tower acknowledging good theater. The pieces bow, the tiles reset, the light dims to a contented glow. And for a few breaths, the tower feels at peace. Because for once, everything happened according to rules, even if the rules rewrote themselves halfway through. The pawns dream. There is one piece, small and unassuming, carved of pale stone, chipped at the base. It never quite moves the way it should. When the game is over and the board silent, the pawn sometimes looks up and swears it sees the ceiling open into stars. It dreams, in its simple way, of walking off the board, into the world beyond games. The tower lets it dream. It knows that even pieces need hope. The eternal game, night in Karazhan, is long. When the moonlight passes through the stained glass and hits the chessboard just right, the pieces wake again. The kings rise, the queens stretch, the knights grin. And somewhere unseen, the Grandmaster whispers, "Your move." The game begins again, and the tower smiles, because stories end. But games can last forever. Chapter 14, The Prince and the Demons Above. There is a point high above Karazhan, where the air forgets how to breathe. Here on the tower's highest balcony, the stars hang too close. They burn not like distant suns, but like lamps in a room that has outgrown its ceiling, and standing among them as though born of their fire and arrogance is Prince Malchazar. He is the final note in Karazhan's long, discordant song, the crescendo after centuries of whispers. If the tower is a book written in grief, he is its last chapter scribbled in ink that smokes and laughs. The arrival. No one summoned him. That is the first and most important fact. After Medivh's fall, when the tower sealed itself, Karazhan stood silent for years. The Valley of Deadwind Pass forgot how to echo. Even the storms avoided it. Then, one night, the stars bent. Observers in Dalaran reported a distortion in the sky, constellations rippling like reflections on disturbed water. At the same time, Karazhan's topmost spire lit from within, flaring bright violet, brighter still, until it shone like an inverted lighthouse, signaling to somewhere else. And through that open door in the heavens stepped the prince. The prince who claimed the tower, Malchezaar is a creature of the Eridar, kin to the demons who serve the Burning Legion, but he is stranger than his brethren, a scholar of chaos, a collector of realms, a lord of impossible geometry. He does not conquer by sword, but by definition. He declares ownership over whatever he can name. When he arrived, he looked upon Karazhan and said, "All worlds, all times, all shadows of reality, they converge here. Therefore, it is mine." And the tower, vain thing that it is, preened. It enjoys being wanted. Malchezaar took up residence in the highest chambers, the Spire of Stars, a place that overlooks not only Azeroth, but other worlds reflected in the folds of its magic. From here, he gazes into every possible horizon and calls them all home. The room without floor or ceiling. His throne chamber defies geometry. There are walls, yes, but they breathe. The floor is a mirror that reflects not your face, but your fate. Above, stars swirl in slow spirals, some recognizable, some invented for the occasion. Malchezaar stands in the center, tall and graceful, his armor glinting like forged night. His wings are folded not from flesh but from energy, vast tapestries of violet flame that ripple with thought. His voice, when he speaks, fills the room like a sermon delivered to gravity itself. He is both regal and theatrical, a creature of infinite confidence who has long forgotten what doubt feels like. "Madness?" he once said, laughing. "No, this is clarity." The Court of Shadows. He keeps a court, of course. Demons adore hierarchy, and Malchezaar's is exquisite. There are infernals hovering at the edges of the room, each one a burning meteor kept in polite suspension. There are lesser demons who record his proclamations in books that write themselves, and there are shadows, human, elven, even draconic shapes, remnants of those who entered Karazhan and impressed him enough to earn a place in his retinue. He calls them echoes of excellence. They do not speak, but when he walks past, they bow, their movements rippling like cloth in wind that isn't there. It is a court of silence and fire, populated entirely by reflections. The philosopher of chaos. Unlike most demons, Malchezaar does not rage. He reasons. He paces as he speaks, gesturing toward stars only he can see, his tone that of a university lecturer discussing apocalypse as metaphor. "You mortals," he muses, "think of realms as separate, your world, your heaven, your hell. But they overlap, fold, entangle. Karazhan is proof. It is the hinge of existence. And if I control the hinge..." He smiles, slow and bright, a sunrise made of malice. "Then all doors are mine." The tower hums in approval. It likes ambition, the duelists who climbed. Inevitably, others came to challenge him. Adventurers, heroes, scholars who believed knowledge should be free from tyranny. They scaled the tower, fought through servants, ghosts, and games until they reached his Hall of Stars. Malchezaar welcomed them warmly. "So, another set of possibilities come to kneel at the foot of infinity. How delightful." He gestures to the void behind him, where fragments of other worlds drift. A chunk of Outland, a frozen shard of Northrend, the ghost of a moon that never existed. "You see? I do not destroy. I collect." Then he draws his twin axes, each a shard of fallen meteor, and the lecture becomes a lesson in cosmic cruelty. The battle that follows is not fought in simple space. Every strike distorts reality. The room folds, time stutters, gravity forgets which way is down. Even defeat here feels like education. And when it's done, when the challengers lie scattered among his constellations, he restores them gently, as if amused by their effort. "You fought well," he says, "but I am the end of stories." The tower chuckles at that, because it knows better. There is no end, not here. Only intermission. The storm outside. From Deadwind Pass, you can sometimes see the lights of his chamber. They flicker like auroras trapped in a jar, rippling across the valley in colors that don't have names. Birds avoid them, so do dreams. Those who camp nearby hear whispers carried on the wind, half lectures, half lullabies, fragments of impossible equations that make the skull itch. One traveler described it best. It was as though the stars were thinking too loudly. His favorite toy. Of all Karazhan's wonders, Malchezaar adores one above all, the night sky engine. It's an orrery that spins through the air above his throne, a mechanical model of infinite worlds. Each planet glows, each orbit sings a faint tone, and sometimes, when he grows sentimental, he reaches out and moves them by hand. With a flick of his claw, he can shift an entire constellation's path. The motion echoes outside, in real sky, just enough to confuse astronomers for years. "Why should creation not be curated?" he says. "Art is nothing without arrangement." He laughs softly, and the stars rearrange themselves into applause. The tower's opinion. Karazhan regards Malchezaar with indulgent amusement. It doesn't fear him, it finds him fascinating, a guest who redecorates and occasionally pays in poetry. Sometimes the tower helps him, opening new passages, showing him visions of other dimensions to study. Other times, it hides his notes just to see him fume. Because the truth is this: Malchezaar thinks he rules the tower, but the tower rules everyone. Still, they get along. A demon prince and a sentient fortress, both obsessed with power and perfection. How could they not? The philosophy of possession. In his quieter moments, Malchezaar sits at the edge of the balcony and stares into the infinite. He speaks softly then, to no one and to everything. "If every world exists in reflection, and I own this mirror, does that not make me God?" The stars do not answer, but somewhere deep below, in the gallery, the curator pauses mid-patrol, as if considering the question. The whisper of the old guardian. Sometimes, in the static between stars, Malchezaar hears another voice, Medivh's. Not accusation, not forgiveness, just observation. "You cannot rule infinity, Prince. You can only drown in it," Malchezaar smiles. "Then I shall learn to breathe." The stars laugh with him. The tower joins in. It loves a good argument, the king of nowhere. So he remains, standing at the top of all stories, surrounded by stars that he cannot quite touch. He is magnificent, tragic, ridiculous, a philosopher who mistook the universe for an audience. When storms roll across Deadwind Pass, their thunder echoes his laughter, and when the night clears and the tower glows faintly violet, travelers whisper prayers they don't believe in, not to gods, but to whatever listens at the top of Karazhan. Because everyone, mortal or not, understands a little of the prince's truth. We all want to own what we cannot hold. The tower sleeps. And yet, even Malchezaar must rest. When his power ebbs, he folds his wings, dismisses his infernals, and lets the stars fade to black. The tower grows quiet, its heartbeat slowing to a deep hum. Far below, the ghosts of servants' tidy rooms no one uses. The dragon stirs in its cage of light, the chessboard resets, and Karazhan, proud, haunted, beautiful Karazhan, dreams of itself once more. Its stories never end. They simply pause, waiting for the next curious soul to open its doors. Chapter 15. The Awakening of Nightbane. There are nights in Deadwind Pass when the wind refuses to move. The air grows heavy, swollen with silence. The stars hide behind a gauze of gray cloud, and the tower, an old, dreaming, restless Karazhan, begins to remember. When Karazhan remembers, the earth trembles. When Karazhan grieves, something climbs out of its own memory. That something is Nightbane, the memory that learned to fly. Nightbane was not always bone and shadow. Once, long ago, it was a living dragon, though which flight it belonged to, no one remembers. Perhaps it was one of the blue, devoted to magic and the Order of Azeroth. Perhaps it was wild, unaffiliated, drawn by curiosity to the Guardian's tower. Whoever it was, it came when Medivh called. In those early years, before corruption and betrayal, the Guardian of Tirisfal sought to master every mystery of the arcane. He studied time, death, even dreams. And dragons, being both ancient and magical, fascinated him most. He invited one to his tower for study, and it came willingly. They say Medivh and the dragon shared a friendship built on curiosity. The mage wished to understand flight, the dragon, the language of spells. For a time, they succeeded. But Karazhan is a jealous place. It keeps what it loves, the fall. When Sargeras's corruption finally bloomed inside Medivh's heart, the tower changed with him. The rooms grew mean. The walls whispered in riddles that cut too deep. The dragon sensed it first. It tried to flee. The tower would not allow it. Magic flared, wards turned inward, and in a flash of violet light, the dragon fell, not to death, but to transformation. Its scales blackened, its wings rotted into ragged veils, its fire turned cold. Medivh, half aware of what he'd done, sealed the creature within a hidden chamber below the spire. There it slept, part relic, part punishment, its dreams bound to the tower's own. When Medivh died, the enchantments holding it broke, but the dragon did not awaken. It waited, because Karazhan had not yet remembered why it needed a guardian, the summoning. Centuries later, when adventurers stormed the tower and laughter once again filled its cursed halls, something in the deep foundation stirred. The magic that had once bound the dragon began to hum. Winds swirled through the valley, pulling leaves and dust into a spiral around the tower. From the balcony of the Spire of Stars, Prince Malchezaar looked down and smiled. "Ah," he murmured, "the house is calling for help." And so the spell began. A storm rolled across Deadwind Pass. Black lightning, white rain, the air trembling with voices. From within the clouds, wings unfolded, vast and skeletal, glowing faintly with ghost light. The dragon's roar tore through the sky, a sound made of sorrow and recognition. Nightbane had awoken, the form of regret. To see Nightbane is to see contradiction. Its bones are bare, yet its body burns with blue flame. Its wings are torn, yet it soars higher than any living dragon. Its eyes burn with memory, not anger, not vengeance, but the weary awareness of one who has seen centuries of failure replayed in loop. Each beat of its wings sends out ripples of ash that fall like snow upon the tower below. The sound is both thunder and heartbeat. It does not attack at once. It circles first, studying. Perhaps it remembers the faces of mortals who once stood beside its master. Perhaps it simply waits for someone to give it a reason. When finally it descends, the ground cracks beneath its claws. Its breath scorches not flesh, but memory, burning away courage, leaving behind awe. The Guardians who called it. There are those who claim that Nightbane is not a beast at all, but a spell, the physical manifestation of Medivh's guilt, or the tower's longing for its lost master. When the air grows heavy with magic, when the ley lines beneath Deadwind Pass align just so, Karazhan's heart whispers to the bones below, "Wake, we are alone again." And the dragon wakes, obedient, faithful, furious. It fights not for conquest, but for order, for the illusion of control in a world where nothing remains still. Those who face it see, for an instant, flashes of the past. Medivh at his desk, the dragon curled beside him like a cat of storms, the laughter of discovery, the soft light of trust, and then the shattering. Every blow of Nightbane's claws carries that grief. Every roar is a confession. The fire that isn't fire. Nightbane's breath is strange. It burns without heat, leaving behind marks that smell of rain and parchment. Those struck by it say they feel no pain, only the sudden rush of forgotten emotion, nostalgia, loss, the ache of memory itself. When the battle ends, the ground smolders not with flame, but with phrases written in molten script that fades as you watch. "I remember the Skiwa," he promised. "It was supposed to be beautiful." The tower reads these quietly, absorbing them like prayers. The battle above. When challenged by mortals, those reckless, bright things who always mistake destiny for sport, Nightbane rises again and again. Its fight is a storm made flesh, ash, fire, sorrow, and song. The tower watches, rapt, because every strike is choreography. And when finally the dragon falls, its body does not crash. It dissolves, feather by feather, bone by bone, into mist that settles over the valley like a benediction. For weeks afterward, the air smells faintly of ozone and forgiveness. And deep inside the tower, the walls sigh, because they know it will not last. Nothing in Karazhan ever truly dies. The tower's confession. Nightbane is the tower's heartbeat externalized. It is how Karazhan mourns Medivh, not with silence, but with spectacle. It cannot weep, so it conjures dragons. Each time Nightbane wakes, it burns away a little of the tower's loneliness. Each time it sleeps, the emptiness returns. Morrow's ever diligent keeps notes in his ledgers. The master's beast took flight again, curtains singed, library windows cracked, tea still hot. He writes this without irony. Routine is his way of keeping madness polite, the echo of forgiveness. Some nights, when the moonlight hits Karazhan just right, shadows play across the clouds in the shape of wings. The servants look up and whisper blessings. The maiden of virtue pauses mid-prayer. Even Netherspite looks toward the sky and rumbles softly. For a moment, the tower feels whole, as though Medivh himself had returned, if only in dream. And perhaps, in some layered corner of reality, he has perhaps Nightbane. Circling endlessly above Deadwind Pass is his forgiveness, a creature made of what he could not say the last flight. When dawn comes, the mist thins, and the tower sleeps again, but the valley remembers. Animals step softly for days. The wind moves slower, cautious, reverent. And those who pass through Deadwind Pass at that hour sometimes hear a sound like enormous wings, receding into distance that does not exist. Nightbane flies still, between worlds, between dreams, guarding the boundary between sorrow and legend. Its watch is endless. Its purpose simple, to remind the tower that grief, too, can be beautiful. The tower breathes. Now Karazhan rests, at least for the moment. The halls are still, though never empty. The servants polish ghosts. The opera hums faintly through velvet curtains. The curator adjusts his lights. The prince gazes into infinity, patient as hunger. And far above them all, wings of blue fire pass once more across the stars. The tower sighs in contentment. For all its madness, for all its tragedy, Karazhan remains what it always was. A home, a memory, a stage, and a dream that refuses to end. Chapter 16. The Heart of Karazhan. There are doors in Karazhan that no hand has ever touched, stairs that lead down instead of up, and corridors that hum quietly to themselves, the way a mind hums when it's thinking. Follow them long enough, past the stables, the galleries, and the quiet chapel of the Maiden, and you'll come to a place that smells of dust, ink, and something older than both. Memory, this is the heart of Karazhan, the place where the tower dreams itself alive. The descent. The entrance isn't grand. It hides behind an old bookcase in the Guardian's library, sealed by a lock that opens only for those who don't mean to find it. Beyond is a staircase of gray stone that slopes inward, a spiral that seems to descend not into the earth, but into thought. The deeper you go, the quieter the world becomes. Not silent, no, silence is simple. This quiet has texture, the creak of memory turning pages, the faint sound of heartbeat that doesn't belong to you. Candles line the walls, but they burn with no flame. Only spheres of soft light, each one pulsing like it's breathing. If you touch them, you'll see flashes of faces, the ghosts of those who loved or loathed this place. Keep walking, and the stairs eventually widen into a cavern. And in that cavern stands a single object, a chair, the chair of the Guardian. It is not a throne, not quite. It is too humble, too human for that. Carved of dark wood, smooth from use, it sits facing an endless pool of still water. This was Medivh's seat, not as Guardian, not as ruler, but as man. Here he came to think, to be quiet, to remember what it meant to be small. The pool before him reflected not his face, but his possibilities. Every decision he could have made, every path not taken. After his death, the pool did not dry. It began to show other faces. Khadgar, Egwin, Aaron, even the fleeting reflections of those who entered the tower centuries later. Karazhan remembers everyone. The pulse. Stand here long. Enough, and you'll feel it. A rhythm, faint but constant. Not the wind, not the earth, but the tower's own heartbeat. Karazhan is alive in its own peculiar way. Every ley line that crosses beneath Deadwind Pass feeds into this chamber, each one a vein carrying the world's magic to the tower's core. The pool at Medivh's feet ripples with it, glowing faintly blue, shifting to violet, then back to calm transparency. Sometimes faces rise from it, made of light and memory. Sometimes they speak, not words, not exactly, more the idea of words, drifting into your thoughts like gentle wind through an open window. If you listen closely, you might hear this. Remember me kindly. The voice in the water. They say Medivh's spirit still lingers here, not the corrupted one slain by his friends, nor the reborn prophet who later warned the world of the Legion's return, but the version of him that the tower refuses to let go of, the man who built it out of love for knowledge and the ache of godliness. When the tower is quiet, when even the ghosts are asleep, he speaks through the pool, sometimes to the tower itself, sometimes to those who wander in by accident. and sometimes to no one in particular, simply to hear the sound of his own forgiveness. "I built this place to learn," he whispers, "and in learning, I forgot why I wished to know." The tower hums, a sympathetic vibration. It has heard this apology countless times and always accepts it. The tower's soul. What makes Karazhan unique isn't just its architecture or its magic. It's the fact that it feels. Every stone, every candle, every echo is connected by a strange empathy, a sentience born from centuries of magic, sorrow, and art. It mourns when its ghosts fade. It rejoices when adventurers return. It dreams in patterns of light that spread across its floors like spilled starlight. It is, in a way, Medivh's greatest creation. Not a fortress, not a weapon, but a living record of his contradictions, his brilliance, his pride, his regret, his endless curiosity. If you stand in the heart long enough, you can feel him thinking through you. The thoughts are vast, slow, and strangely gentle. All knowledge is love that has forgotten its name. The visitors of the deep. Few reach this place, but a handful have. Khadgar came once, long after his master's death. He stayed for 3 days and spoke to the pool. No one knows what it said back, but when he emerged, he was smiling. A quiet, weary smile. "He's still in there," was all he told the servants. Even Moros, who seldom leaves his duties, has been known to stand at the stairway's edge, polishing a glass that doesn't need polishing. He listens for the heartbeat and nods, satisfied. Routine, even here, has meaning. The symphony beneath. If you could hear the tower from far enough away, you'd find that every noise, every creak of the gallery, every hum of the dragon above, every echo of laughter in the opera forms part of one great harmony. Karazhan sings softly, endlessly, in a language made of light and shadow. Its melody is grief turned beautiful. Even Malkazar, proud and cosmic, pauses sometimes to listen. And when Nightbane circles overhead, its wings beat in time with that slow, eternal rhythm. The dream. Sometimes, when the moon is full and the ley lines pulse brighter, the tower dreams aloud. The walls turn translucent, the rooms overlap, the opera bleeding into the gallery into the chapel into the stars. Every ghost, every echo, every fragment of memory steps into the same moment, and for a heartbeat, Karazhan is whole again. You can see Medivh at his desk, Aran pacing by the window, the maiden bowing her head in peace, Netherspite gliding through endless sky, and the curator polishing constellations. They all exist together, not past, not future, but now. Then, just as softly, the dream fades. The tower sighs, content. The final reflection. Look into the pool one last time. If you've been kind, it shows you your own reflection, peaceful, curious, unchanged. If you've been cruel, it shows you someone else's, a reminder that you're never truly alone here. And if you've listened, truly listened, it shows you the tower's reflection instead. A spire of stone and starlight, its windows glowing with laughter and sorrow in equal measure. A home built for thought and haunted by feeling. A paradox too beautiful to destroy. The whisper of goodbye. Before you leave, you'll hear it. A faint voice, from everywhere and nowhere, gentle as a turning page. "Thank you for visiting my dreams." The air warms. The candles flicker, one by one, and extinguish. The heartbeat slows. Karazhan sleeps again. But somewhere in the valley, a traveler looks up at the tower and sees a single window still glowing. And for a moment, they swear they hear laughter. Soft, human, and kind. Because even in a place built from sorrow, joy always finds a way to echo. So ends the tale of Karazhan, a library of ghosts, a citadel of contradictions, a place where love and madness wear the same robes. Its master is gone, its servants are dust, its halls are filled with music and mirrors. And yet, if you listen closely on quiet nights, you can still hear it breathe. For Karazhan is not a ruin, it is a story. And stories, as any dreamer knows, never truly end. They simply wait for someone else to listen.